first thing I lost was my certainty that a voice belongs to the throat it comes from. I have walked the overlooks and back trails of New River Gorge for 11 seasons, long enough to know the difference between the river talking to itself in the rapids and something on the bank pretending to be the river. That is the part nobody warns you about when you take the green uniform and the radio and the flat hat. They teach you first aid, and they teach you how to read a topographic map and how to talk a frightened family down off a ledge above the water. They do not teach you that some things in these hills learn your speech the way a bird learns a song, note for note, until the song is a trap. I patrol the northern rim, from the old iron bones of the bridge down to the drowned mining camps that the forest has been eating for 100 years. Nuttleberg, Kaymore. Names that used to mean coke ovens and company houses, and men who went underground before sunrise and came up after sundown, so that for months at a stretch they never once saw the gorge in daylight. Now the ovens are cold arches full of rhododendron, and the tipple stands rusting on the slope like the ribcage of something that starved to death standing up. People come to hike it. They come to photograph the bridge. In summer they come to camp and to hunt the ridges above the preserve boundary, and it was a summer party of 9 that walked into my district on the last Friday of July, and did not all walk out. You should understand the country first, because the country is half the story. The New River is older than the mountains it cut through, older than the hills you can see from the overlooks, one of the oldest rivers on the face of the earth, and it runs deep in a gorge so steep that the sun only finds the water for a few hours in the middle of the day. The walls are close hardwood and laurel and rock, and the hollows fold back on themselves, and a person who steps 20 feet off a marked trail can turn a full circle and not know which way is out. Sound does strange things in a place like that. A voice from across the gorge can seem to come from your elbow. A shout from the water below can seem to fall out of the trees above you. Any ranger who has worked it long enough stops trusting his ears in the gorge, and that habit, that one hard habit, is the only reason I am here to tell this. I remember the truck first, an old crew cab with mud to the door handles and a rack of long guns behind the seats, and the man who climbed out of it and put his hand up to me like we were already friends. That was Peter Nocona, 47 years old, broad through the shoulders, a voice that carried without trying. He had the permits in a plastic sleeve, and he had done this a dozen times, I could tell, the way he knew to keep his party back from the rim while he talked to me. Behind him the others spilled out and stretched and shouldered their packs. Buffalo Hump was the big one, 41, quiet in the way that large men learn to be so they do not frighten anybody by accident. He carried more than his share without being asked. Ishitai was 29 and never once looked up from his phone, checking a signal that does not exist that far into the gorge, and I watched him frown at the empty bars like the mountain was broken and not simply older than the idea of a signal. Tabananica, 34, had the look of the one who keeps the group fed and counts the heads at night, then the younger ones. Yamparika, 26, all eagerness, already asking me where the good overlooks were. Kaweti, 38, who read the ground when he walked, a hunter to the bone. Nokoni, 31, watchful and silent, the kind who says little and misses nothing. Quinai, 44, who carried the heavy red medical bag and knew how to use it, which is the only reason any of them lived to be found. And last out of the truck, moving slow, was the oldest, 55 years old, gray coming in at the temples, and the others called him Wanderer, and he did not smile when Peta introduced him to me. He looked past my shoulder at the tree line, and he held that look a beat too long, the way a man does when he has heard a thing before that he hoped never to hear again. I gave them the talk I give everyone. Store your food in the bear boxes or hang it high. Stay on the marked trails after the light goes. If you hunt the ridge, know your boundary and know your backdrop. And then, because 11 seasons had put it in my mouth whether I believed it or not, I told them the other thing. I told them that if they heard a voice at night calling one of their own names from out in the trees, they were not to answer it, and they were not to go to it, no matter how much it sounded like family. Yamparika laughed. Most of them smiled. Peta thanked me and said they would be careful. Only Wanderer met my eyes, and he did not smile at all, and he said, low enough that the others could not hear it, that he already knew. I watched them go up the trail toward the ridge camp as the afternoon leaned long and gold across the gorge, 9 backs growing smaller, and I told myself what I always tell myself, that the old warning is a story rangers pass down to keep the tourists respectful, that the hills are only hills. I got in my own truck and I drove the rim road back toward the station, and I did not know yet that I had just spoken to two of them for the last time, or that by the following night I would be the one out in the trees, listening to my own name come back to me in a voice I trusted, and I would understand, too late, exactly how the trap is baited. I did not sleep well that night, though I could not have told you why. I put it down to the heat. The station sits close under the rim, and in late July the air pools in the gorge and does not move, and the window fan only pushes the same warm breath back over you until morning. But I have slept through worse heat than that. What kept me turning was a feeling with no shape to it. The animal part of the brain that stiffens before the rest of you understands there is a reason. Twice I got up and stood at the screen door and looked up the black wall of the ridge where their camp would be, and twice I saw nothing but the river of stars over the gorge and the one small orange smear of their fire, and I went back to bed. In the morning the fire was out. That is nothing. Fires go out, but I found myself pulling on my boots earlier than my shift required, and I took the truck up the rim road and hiked the spur trail toward the ridge, telling myself I was only doing a courtesy check on a large party in rough country. Their camp was set well. Peta knew his business. The tents were pitched on high, dry ground. The food was up in the trees on a proper line, and Tabananica was already at the little stove with coffee going. She was the first to see me come out of the rhododendron, and something in her face told me I was not the only one who had passed a poor night. She waited until the others were busy, Coetti cleaning a rifle and Yamparica still asleep and the rest scattered around the camp, and then she came close and asked me, quietly, whether there were other hunters up on the ridge. I told her the ridge was theirs this week. Their permit was the only one issued for that section. She nodded slowly, like that was the answer she had been afraid of, and she told me that around 3 in the morning she had heard footsteps. Not an animal, she said. She knew animals. She had heard a deer move through camp before, and a bear once, and this was neither. This walked upright, 2 feet, slow, deliberate, all the way around the outside of the tents in a wide circle, once, and then again the other way. And when she had unzipped the flap of her tent and looked out, there was nothing there, but the footsteps had stopped the instant the zipper moved, as if whatever made them was standing perfectly still, waiting to see what she would do. I told her it was probably one of her own party stepping out to relieve themselves in the night. She looked at me with a patience that made me ashamed of the lie, because we both knew that a man walking to the tree line does not circle the whole camp twice and then vanish. But she let me say it. People will let you hand them a comfortable lie right up until the moment the truth walks into the firelight, and after that they never let you do it again. I stayed for a cup of coffee I did not want. Wanderer sat apart on a rock at the edge of the clearing, looking down the slope into the trees, and when I brought my cup over and sat near him, he spoke without turning his head. He asked me if I knew what these hills were before they were a park, before the mines, before the railroad. I said I knew some of it. He said his grandfather had known men who would not hunt certain ridges no matter how the game ran on them, because those ridges belonged to something that wore the shape of whatever it needed to wear, something that could pull a coat of skin over itself the way a man pulls on a jacket, and walk in it, and speak with the mouth of it. He said the word for it in a language I did not know, and then he said the closest word we have, and the word landed in the warm morning air and sat there like a stone dropped in still water. I did not laugh at him. 11 seasons had cured me of laughing at old men who watch tree lines. But I told him what I honestly believed, which was that grief and fear and a long night can make footsteps out of a branch scraping a tent, and can make a monster out of a bad dream. He looked at me then, the first time he had looked at me directly, and he said that he hoped I was right, and that he did not think I was, and that the thing had already been to their camp once, and had been counting them, and that whatever counts you is deciding something. I left them at mid-morning. I had a report of a fallen climber at the endless wall that turned out to be a sprained ankle and a scared kid, and by the time I had that sorted and had walked the injured boy out to the rim, it was late afternoon. I meant to radio the ridge party that evening on the frequency I had given Peta. I did try. What came back over the radio the first time was static, which is normal in the gorge. What came back the second time, faint under the static, was a voice, and it was calling a name, over and over, patient and soft, out of the hiss of the empty air. It was calling for Yamparica, and the voice that called him was Yamparica's own. I told myself the radio was bleeding 2 conversations together, some fluke of the signal folding a voice back on itself. I have heard strange things come over a handset in these hills, but I could not make myself believe it, and I did the thing I would tell any visitor never to do. I went up the ridge alone, in the last of the light, because 9 people were up there and something was wrong, and I was the only law and the only help within an hour of hard country. The gorge changes when the sun drops behind the western rim. The heat lifts off the ground and the shadows come up out of the hollows like water filling a basin, and the birds go quiet all at once, the way they do, so that you notice the silence more than you ever notice the song. I climbed the spur trail with my flashlight off, saving it, letting my eyes hold what gray was left, and the whole way up I had the feeling I have never been able to explain to anyone who has not felt it. The feeling of being walked beside, not followed, which is a thing behind you, beside. Something keeping pace just off the trail in the laurel, matching my stride, close enough that I should have heard it and heard nothing at all. If you have ever felt that on a trail at dusk, that certainty that the space 3 feet to your left is occupied, then you already know why I am telling this the way I am telling it, and you know it is not the kind of thing a man invents. And if you have gotten this far and you have not yet pressed the button to like this video, do it now, because what I walked into at the top of that ridge is the part I have carried alone for a long time, and I would rest a little easier knowing somebody is walking it with me. I came into their camp after full night. The fire was high, too high, the way people build it when they are trying to push something back with light. They were all there. I counted them the way I count everything now, the way Wanderer had put in my head. Pita, Buffalo Hump, Ishatai, his dead phone finally forgotten in his pocket, Tabananika, Koweti, Nokoni, Queen Eye with his red bag beside his knee, Wanderer on his rock, and Yamparika, sitting close to the flames with a blanket around his shoulders though the night was warm, and his face was the color of ash, and he would not look at anyone. Peta took me aside. He was not a man who frightened, and he was frightened. He told me that an hour before dusk, Yamparika had gone down to the little spring below the camp to fill the water bags, a walk of 2 minutes, and had not come back. They had gone down after him and found the water bags on the ground by the spring, full, and no sign of him. They had called, and then, from up the slope, from the direction of the camp they had just left, they had heard Yamparika answer. They had heard him call back that he was fine, that he was already at the camp, come on up. And when they climbed back to the camp, he was not there. They had stood in the empty clearing calling his name, and his voice had answered them again, this time from down at the spring, from the very place they had just searched. Back and forth, Peta said, above them and below them. His voice, exactly his voice, always coming from where they were not. For the better part of an hour it had led them up and down that slope in the falling light, 9 grown people chasing a voice through the laurel, until Koweti, who reads the ground, had stopped them cold, because in the soft earth by the spring Koweti had found the tracks, and the tracks were wrong. I made him show me. We went down to the spring together with our lights on, Peta and Koweti and me, and Koweti crouched and put his hand near the print without touching it. It was the shape of a bare human foot, long, pressed deep, but the toes were wrong, too long, and there were the marks of something at the end of each one that a toe does not have. And the stride between the prints, when Koweti walked me along them, was wider than any of us could match at a dead run, and the thing that made them had not been running, it had been walking. Walking upright on 2 feet that were almost a man's feet and were not, in a wide, slow circle around the spring, around and around the place where Yamparika had knelt to fill the bags, and Yamparika himself. When we climbed back to the fire, he was still sitting wrapped in the blanket, and I crouched in front of him and asked him gently what had happened at the spring. It took him a long time to speak. When he did, his voice was flat and small. He said he had knelt down to fill the bags and had heard someone say his name, right at his shoulder, close as I was to him now. And he had turned, expecting one of the others, and there had been a face there. He would not describe it. He said only that it had worn a face he almost knew, the way you almost know a face in a dream, and that it had smiled at him with too many teeth in the smile, and had said his name once more, kindly, in his mother's voice, and that he had run without deciding to run, and did not remember the running, and had come back to himself already sitting by the fire with no memory of how he crossed the ground between. Queen Eye had checked him over with the careful hands of a man who knew bodies, and found no wound. But when I looked at Yamparika in the firelight, I saw the thing that Queen Eye could not put in any medical bag. I saw that some part of the young man had been left down at that spring, and that whatever came back up the slope wearing his frightened face was going to be easier to fool, from now on, than the rest of them. Because the thing in the trees had spoken to him in his mother's voice, and a part of him, against all sense, still wanted to answer. We did not sleep. There is no point pretending anyone tried. We built the fire higher, and we sat with our backs to it in a rough circle facing out, 10 of us now with me among them, watching the wall of laurel where the firelight died. I had my radio and I raised the station and told the night dispatcher to send help at first light, that I had a party in distress on the North Ridge and a missing person, and she said what she had to say about weather and manpower and the impossibility of a night extraction in that terrain, and I understood. Help would come with the sun. The sun was a long way off. It came for us slowly, and it came the way Wanderer had said it would, wearing what it needed to wear. The first voice was Yamparika's mother again, or the memory of her the thing had taken from him. It came from out past the fire, off to the north, soft and coaxing, calling not for Yamparika now but for all of them, calling them by name one after another in a woman's warm voice, telling them it was cold out here and to come and help her. She was hurt. She could not walk. Yamparika made a sound I never want to hear a person make again and started to rise, and Buffalo Hump, without a word, put one enormous arm around the boy and held him down against the ground, gently, the way you would hold someone who was trying to walk into a fire, and did not let go for the rest of the night. Then the voice changed. This is the part that is hard to say in a way that carries how it felt. The voice out in the trees stopped being the mother and became Yamparika, sitting right there among us, so that we heard his voice from the laurel and from the blanket beside us at the very same instant, 2 of him, and the one in the trees was calling for Peta to come out and find him. Then it was Peta's voice, calling for Buffalo Hump. Then it was Tabananika's, weeping, from a stand of trees where no one stood. It went around our circle, stealing us one at a time, and throwing our own voices back at us out of the night, learning us, trying us, looking for the one loose thread it could pull to unravel the whole group and scatter us into the trees where it wanted us. And it did more than call. Somewhere in the deepest hour, when the fire had burned down to a low red bed, and Kaweti was feeding it branch by branch to keep the light up, the voices stopped for a while, and the stopping was worse than the sound. In that stillness we heard it at the very edge of the firelight, just past where the glow gave out, breathing. Slow, wet, patient breathing, moving along the outside of our circle the way the footsteps had moved around the tents the first night, testing the ring of light for a gap the way a river tests a bank for the low place to come through. Nokoni, who had not said a word since dusk, whispered that he could smell it, and he was right. There was a smell rolling in off the trees that did not belong to any living animal, a smell like a deer 3 days dead in August, sweet and thick and wrong, and it grew stronger wherever the breathing was and faded when it moved on, so that we could track the thing around us in the night by nothing but the smell of it and the sound of it drawing breath. It did not step into the light. It knew better than we did what the light would cost it. But it walked that line for the better part of an hour, close, close, and every one of us felt what it is to be livestock inside a fence with the wolf walking the rails. Ishitai broke a little after the middle of the night. The young man who had spent the first day frowning at a phone for a signal had gone very quiet, and then very still, and then he stood up. He said, in a strange, calm, reasonable voice, that this was insane, that we were grown people frightened by a trick, that he was going to walk down the trail to the ranger station and be done with it. I told him no. I told him as plainly and as hard as I have ever told anyone anything that the trail was exactly what the thing wanted him on, alone, in the night. Peta told him. Wanderer told him. And Ishitai looked at us all with a kind of pity, like we were the ones who had lost our minds, and he shouldered his pack and he walked out of the firelight to the north. He got perhaps 30 feet. We heard his boots on the trail, and then we heard, from the black beyond the fire, my own voice. It called to Ishitai by name. It called in the exact voice of the ranger sitting right there in the circle with them, my voice, calm and official and reassuring, and it told him that it was fine, that it was me, that it had come part way up the trail to meet him and would walk him down, just keep coming toward the sound of my voice, and I was sitting there. I was sitting in the circle with my mouth shut, and my own voice was out there in the trees, kind and certain, telling a frightened young man to come to it. I opened my mouth to shout to him that it was not me, and in that instant I understood the true horror of the thing, because if I called out, he would hear two of my voices, and how in that gloom and that terror was he to know which one was the man and which was the mouth wearing the man? I called out anyway. I screamed his name and told him to come back to the fire, and out in the trees my other voice laughed, softly, and called him on. For one endless moment we heard Ishitai standing still on the trail between the two voices, breathing, choosing, and then we heard him choose wrong. We heard his boots move away from the fire, toward the kind and lying voice, faster and faster, and then we heard him running, and then Ishitai made one short sound that was cut off in the middle, and after that the ridge was very quiet, and there were only 9 of us again, and I have never in my life felt anything as heavy as that silence where a running man's footsteps used to be. We did not go after him. God forgive me, we did not go after him, because there was nothing to go after him with except more of us to feed to the trees, and Peta held Tabananica down when she tried, and Wanderer said, in a voice with no hope left in it, that it was too late for Ishitai the moment he crossed the firelight, and that the only thing we could do now was last until the sun. So we lasted. We sat in our circle with our backs to the flames, and we did not speak and we did not answer the voices, and the voices tried us all the rest of that night, patient, tireless, wearing the dead and the living, until the gray finally came up out of the eastern gorge, and the birds, blessedly, began to sing, and the voices in the trees went silent all at once, the way they had gone silent for Ishitai, and I knew that the thing had gone to ground for the day and that we had until nightfall to get down off that ridge alive. We came down the ridge in the early light like people walking out of a battle, which in a way we were. 9 of us. Queenai had given Yamparika something light from his red bag so the boy would walk and not bolt, and Buffalo Hump kept a hand on him the whole way. I put myself at the front, and Coetti at the back, the 2 of us with the only long guns anyone still trusted to hold, and I told them the rule for the descent, and I made every one of them say it back to me, no matter what voice you hear, no matter whose, no matter what it says or how it begs. You keep your eyes on the pack in front of you, and you walk, and you do not answer, and you do not stop, and you do not look into the trees. It came with us the whole way down, not in the night now but in the flat gray daylight, which was somehow worse, because a thing that only owns the night you can almost bear, but a thing that follows you into the morning has broken a promise the world makes you as a child. We did not see it, not fully, not ever fully, but we saw it enough. Off in the laurel, keeping pace, there would be a shape that was almost a large animal and moved almost like one, and then, for a stride or two, stood upright and moved like a man, and then dropped back down and was an animal again, and the mind refused to hold it, slid off it, would not let it be one thing. Once, at a switchback, I looked where I had told the others not to look, and I saw it standing still among the trees not 40 feet off, watching us pass. It wore, across its shoulders, the loose hanging shape of a hide, gray and wrong, and above the hide it had a face, and the face was trying to be a person's face, and had gotten almost everything right, and one thing terribly wrong, and I understood in my body and not my mind why every old man who ever watched a tree line watched it the way he did. I looked away. I kept walking. It is the hardest thing I have ever done, and I did it because behind me were 8 people who would only keep walking if the ranger at the front kept walking, and so I kept walking. It tried us one last time at the bottom, where the spur trail meets the rim road and the trees open out and my truck sat waiting in the gravel lot with the blessed ordinary sun on its hood. That last stretch of trail runs through a stand of old hardwood, close and green, and it was there, with the road and the trucks in sight, with safety close enough to run for, that the thing played its final card. It called from the road. From ahead of us, from the direction of the trucks and the open sun and the way out, it called in Ishitai's voice, alive and relieved and laughing, telling us he had made it down in the night after all, that he was at the trucks, that he was fine, come on, hurry up, and I felt the whole line of them behind me lurch with the awful hope of it, because we all wanted it to be true. We wanted Ishitai to be alive and at the trucks more than we had ever wanted anything, and the thing knew that, and that is what a mimic truly hunts, not your ears, your hope. Wanderer saved us, the oldest, the one who had known from the tree line on the first afternoon. He stopped dead in the trail and he said, loud enough for all of us, do not run to it, because Ishitai is dead, and the dead do not laugh at us from the sunlight. And if we run toward that voice, we run scattered, and we run into the trees and it takes us in the last 100 feet with the road in sight. He said, "Walk. Together. Slow. Do not answer." And he took Yamparika's other arm, and we walked, together, slow, past the laughing voice of a dead young man, out of the last of the trees and into the gravel lot in the full high morning sun. And the voice followed us to the very edge of the trees and no farther, and stopped, and the woods behind us went silent, and we were standing on the open road in the sunlight, 9 of us, alive. The search teams found nothing of Ishitai for 3 days. On the 3rd day they found his pack, undisturbed, sitting upright and neatly closed at the base of a tree a 1/4 mile from where he had walked off the trail, in a direction that made no sense, deeper into the gorge instead of out of it, as though it had been carried there and set down with care. They never found him. The report I filed used the words we use for these things: lost while separated from his party, presumed. The gorge is vast and steep and swallows people every year, and no one who reads the file will ever picture what I have just told you, and that is as it should be, because the file has to hold and a man has to keep his post, and there is no line on the form for what actually walked us down that ridge. Peta and his party went home. Yamparika, the last I heard, does not sleep well, and will not speak of it, and startles at his mother's voice on the telephone. Wanderer shook my hand at the trucks before they drove out, and held it, and looked at me the way he had looked at the tree line on the first day. And he told me I would be all right if I remembered one thing. He told me the thing does not forget a voice once it has taken it. He told me it had my voice now, and Ishitai's, and the mother's, and all the others it had gathered off us in the night, and that it keeps them, and uses them, and that some evening years from now, on some quiet trail at dusk, I might hear one of them call to me out of the laurel, kind and certain, from a direction where no one stands. That was 3 summers ago. I still work the North Rim. I still give the visitors the talk at the trailhead, the food and the trails and the boundary. And at the end of it, I still tell them the other thing, about the voice at night and not answering it, and most of them smile the way Yamparika smiled. Let them smile. I am not telling it for them. I am telling it because 2 nights ago I was walking the spur trail near the spring in the last of the light, alone, doing a courtesy check on a party that had come in for the summer, and something off in the laurel, keeping pace with me just out of sight, 3 feet to my left, close enough that I should have heard it and heard nothing at all, said my name. And it said it in the voice of a young man named Ishitai, who has been gone for 3 years, and it said it kindly. And God help me, after everything, after all of it, some small and ancient part of me, the part the thing has been patient enough to wait 3 years for, wanted to turn my head and answer. I did not turn my head. I have not turned my head yet, but the summer is long, and the trail is quiet, and it knows my name, and it is not in any hurry at all. I suppose it is expected that anybody who chooses to follow in the footsteps of Smokey the Bear would be possibly stuck in a few scary situations. That certainly was the case for me as I spent my nights working alongside park rangers on some of most dangerous and terrifying trails in the States. It's not what one might think about being a ranger, though. We don't spend every day sitting around watching deer graze or children play in the playgrounds. Instead, what happens behind those locked gates is something more akin to horror movies than a picnic. If you manage to find your way through these wooded corridors without being eaten alive by some wild animal or eaten after a bear, you could end up with some serious psychological damage. As my first summer as a ranger was coming to an end, I decided that I wanted to spend one last night in the woods alone. Not many rangers do that kind of thing anymore, but for me it was sort of this cleansing ritual. My girlfriend had just broken up with me at the time, and I needed time to work through that emotional trauma. I knew there were other people who understood my pain. They would be likely willing to talk about the world ending when we got close enough in proximity. Every man needs his space from time to time, even if he is working within the confines of the law. To be honest, I wasn't really sure what to expect to be out there in the woods with no one else around. I had been alone quite a few times before, but never running into any real trouble. But this time my mind was racing through the worst-case scenarios, and it almost felt like fate that I would get caught up in some kind of adventure. The breakup with Sarah had been devastating. 3 years together, and she ended it with a text message while I was on duty. "We want different things," she wrote. The truth was that she wanted the stability of city life, and I couldn't give up the wilderness. The parks had become my sanctuary after my father died 2 years ago. He'd been a ranger for 30 years before cancer took him, and following in his footsteps felt like keeping part of him alive. My supervisor, Jenkins, had tried to talk me out of the solo overnight. "The trails at Oroville are getting strange reports lately," he'd said, his weathered face creased with concern. 3 hikers went missing last month. They turned up eventually, but they were different. Wouldn't talk about what happened. I dismissed his concerns with the confidence of youth. "I know every inch of that park, sir. I'll stick to the established areas." He'd sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. "At least take the radio." The radio now hung at my belt, silent as the trees around me. I'd sworn I would use it if anything unusual happened, but what constitutes unusual in a place where mountain lions scream like murdered women and bears can appear from nowhere like furry ghosts? As the afternoon waned, I packed my gear. Standard issue sleeping bag, first aid kit, water purification tablets, emergency flares, a hunting knife my father had given me on my 16th birthday, and enough food for 24 hours. I'd left my itinerary with the station as required, marking my intended camping spot near the eastern shore of Lake Oroville. Jenkins' parting words echoed in my mind as I locked my truck at the ranger station. "The woods have been restless lately, Miller, like they're hiding something." At the time, I'd laughed. Now, as shadows lengthened across the trail and the late August heat began to dissipate, his words carried an ominous weight I couldn't shake. The trail to Lake Oroville wound through ancient redwoods that blocked the fading sunlight, creating a premature dusk on the forest floor. Normally I found comfort in the embrace of these giants, but today the silence felt oppressive. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just the crunch of my boots on fallen pine needles and my own breathing. I reached the first junction and hesitated. The main trail continued straight, well-maintained, and regularly patrolled. The smaller path to the right descended more steeply toward my favorite spot, a secluded inlet rarely visited by tourists. Standing at this crossroads, I felt a prickle along my spine, as though unseen eyes were watching from the deepening shadows. "Get a grip, Miller," I muttered to myself, adjusting my pack. "This is your home." I chose the right-hand path, moving deeper into territory I knew well but suddenly felt foreign. The radio at my hip emitted a burst of static, making me jump. I unclipped it, bringing it to my ear, but heard only the empty hiss of dead air. "Ranger Station, this is Miller. Radio check, over." No response came through the static. I tried again with the same result. We knew there were dead zones in the park where the mountains blocked the signal, but this wasn't one of them. At least, it hadn't been before. Unease crawled up my spine, but I pressed on. The lake would be visible soon, and with it would come the open sky and, hopefully, better reception. The trail narrowed, forcing me to duck under low-hanging branches that seemed to reach for my pack like grasping fingers. A sudden crack echoed through the forest, the unmistakable sound of a branch breaking under weight. I froze, scanning the dense undergrowth for movement. Nothing. Then, from somewhere ahead, came a sound that didn't belong in these woods. A low, rhythmic humming, almost like chanting, rising and falling on the still air. My first thought was illegal campers. We'd had problems with occult groups in the past, drawn to the ancient trees for their rituals, usually harmless, but a fire hazard and disturbance to wildlife. I continued forward more cautiously, one hand on my knife, the other reaching for the flashlight as daylight continued to fade. The trail opened onto a small clearing, and beyond it the dark waters of Lake Oroville stretched into the distance, reflecting the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. My favorite spot lay just ahead, a natural peninsula that jutted into the water, creating a perfect campsite surrounded on 3 sides by the lake. The humming had stopped, replaced by the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Relief washed over me. Whatever I had heard was gone, and the familiar view of the lake restored my confidence. I would make camp, get some sleep, and in the morning everything would seem less ominous. Sarah and her rejection would be just another memory to leave behind in the city. I just crossed over one of the small bridges leading across the lake when I heard something rustling behind me, more similar to low growls than anything else, really. It sounded like something was stalking towards me, perhaps a bear. The only thing about these sounds that didn't scream bear were its frequency. They were more sporadic than I would have expected. My ears picked up this distinct sound of footsteps. More than once, actually, as if somebody were running towards me, directly through the thicket. Not wanting to meet with whatever was out there on my own terms, I scrambled for one of the trees and threw myself up into it to try and hide. Unfortunately, jumping back had cost me more time than I realized. And by the time that I reached around and grabbed hold of a branch, something hit me hard right in the side. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs and sent me sprawling across the forest floor. My pack cushioned some of the fall, but pain radiated through my ribs. I gasped, trying to pull air back into my body, my vision swimming with black spots. Through the disorientation, I heard those footsteps again, multiple sets, circling me. I rolled onto my back, fumbling for my knife, but my fingers found only empty leather. The sheath had torn open in the fall, the blade lost somewhere in the darkness. "Who's there?" I called, my voice hoarse. "This is Ranger Miller. Identify yourself." Only silence answered me, broken by the soft snap of twigs as whatever circled me continued its approach. I activated my flashlight, sweeping the beam in a wide arc around me. The light caught a figure just beyond the trees, humanoid but wrong somehow. It ducked away before I could focus, but the glimpse I caught froze the blood in my veins. Gaunt, pale skin stretched over an elongated face, eyes reflecting the light like an animal's. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the stabbing pain in my side. My radio. I needed to call for backup. I grabbed it from my belt, pressing the transmit button with trembling fingers. "Emergency. Ranger Miller at East Oralville. Coordinates." Something struck my hand, sending the radio flying into the underbrush. I spun, swinging the flashlight like a club, but hit only air. The footsteps had multiplied, coming from all directions now. My light caught flashes of movement, thin, agile forms darting between trees, always staying just at the edge of visibility. "I'm armed," I lied, backing toward the lake. Water at my back would limit their approach to one direction. "State Park law enforcement, stand down." A high, keening sound rose from the forest, not quite human, not quite animal. It was answered by similar calls, a nightmarish chorus surrounding me. I counted at least 5 distinct voices, communicating in some primal language I couldn't comprehend. The peninsula was 30 yards away. If I could reach it, set up a defensive position, maybe light one of the emergency flares, I took a deep breath and ran. The forest erupted into movement behind me. Branches whipped my face as I sprinted down the narrow trail, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly ahead. The footsteps gained on me, impossibly fast, accompanied by that terrible keening that seemed to come from everywhere at once. 20 yards. My lungs burned, each breath sending shards of pain through my injured ribs. 10 yards. The open area of the peninsula was visible now, the dark water beyond it my only hope of safety. 5 yards. Something snagged my ankle, sending me crashing to the ground. My flashlight flew from my grasp, spinning across the dirt to illuminate a grotesque scene. Pale, emaciated figures emerging from the tree line, moving with a terrible fluid grace that no human could possess. I kicked frantically at whatever held my ankle, connecting with something solid. A hiss of pain, and my leg was free. I scrambled forward on hands and knees, reaching for the flashlight. My fingers had just closed around it when something heavy landed on my back, driving me into the ground. Hot breath against my neck, the smell of earth and something rotten. A voice, barely human, whispered words I couldn't understand, but the malice in them needed no translation. I bucked and twisted, fighting with the desperate strength of pure terror. My elbow connected with something that gave way with a wet crunch. The weight on my back lessened, and I rolled free, swinging the flashlight in a wide arc. The beam caught my attacker, a male figure, naked and filthy, its skin a pallid gray in the harsh light. But it was the face that would haunt my nightmares, features almost human but twisted, as though sculpted by someone who had only ever heard descriptions of people. The nose was flattened, nostrils flared like a bat's, the mouth stretched too wide, filled with jagged, uneven teeth. And the eyes, God, the eyes, huge and black with no whites at all, like polished obsidian set into that horrific face. It shrieked, throwing up a hand to shield itself from the light. I seized the moment, staggering to my feet and lunging toward the peninsula. Behind me, others joined the shrieking, the sound building to a crescendo that seemed to shake the very air. I reached the open ground of the peninsula and spun to face my pursuers, flashlight held before me like a talisman. They gathered at the tree line, 7 or 8 of them, their inhuman faces contorted with rage or hunger or some emotion I had no name for. My free hand found the emergency flare in my jacket pocket. One twist of the cap, one sharp strike, and red light exploded into the night, casting everything in a hellish glow. The creatures recoiled, their shrieks turning to hisses of pain or fear. For one heartbeat I thought I was safe. Then one of them, taller than the rest, with a necklace of what looked horribly like human teeth, stepped forward. It raised a hand and the others fell silent. In the red glare of the flare, it smiled at me, a terrible knowing smile that held centuries of malice. It spoke, a single guttural word that seemed to vibrate in my bones, and then they charged. I hurled the flare at the nearest one, catching it in the chest. It went down screaming, its skin sizzling where the phosphorus touched, but the others kept coming. I turned to run for the water, but strong hands grabbed me from behind, spinning me around. The tall one stood before me, its black eyes reflecting the dying light of the flare. It reached out one long-fingered hand and pressed it against my forehead. Pain exploded behind my eyes, and darkness swallowed me whole. You know, it feels like forever before I felt like landing against something soft and squishy. It wasn't exactly warm or inviting, so all of those other feelings must just be an illusion brought on by adrenaline. It only took a single moment for me to realize what had been happening, that I had been wrapped at the ankles, waist, shoulders, and neck in some kind of netting. I didn't know what exactly it was made out of, but it wasn't rope, it was some sort of binding material. My hands were then completely immobilized by entanglement, as well, so there wasn't much I could do, other than struggle against my bonds. A dead-end endeavor, yet there was ever one. Now, the first thing I noticed, when I could finally see again, is it was completely dark around me. Consciousness returned slowly, my mind struggling to piece together fragmented sensations. The netting that bound me was fibrous but damp, as though soaked in some viscous liquid that had partially dried. It clung to my skin like a second layer, tightening when I struggled against it. The smell was overwhelming, earthy and organic, like decaying vegetation mixed with something metallic that might have been blood. My head throbbed where the creature had touched me. The pain radiated outward in pulses that matched my heartbeat, each one sending fresh waves of nausea through my body. I tried to focus, to control my breathing and assess my situation. Ranger training had covered wilderness survival, first aid, even hostage scenarios, but nothing about being captured by whatever these things were. All light coming from behind with only blackness ahead. Two dim lights appeared along the walls on either side of me and began approaching slowly as my eyes would now adjust. They were really more like natural animal eyes than any sort of man-made illusions. Even worse, I noticed that the blackness ahead of me wasn't really coming from a lack of light at all. Instead, there appeared to be some kind of organic wall blocking at my view, spreading out across the room to each side. I had no idea how large this place was, but it must have been bigger than what I could see, one behind me and another in front of me. They made themselves known moments later. Footsteps. The noises were too far away for me to make out at first, but then I could hear they belonged to something. As my vision adjusted to the near darkness, details of my prison emerged. I was in some kind of underground chamber, the walls rough-hewn from the living rock but overlaid with that same organic material that bound me. A network of fibrous strands that glistened with moisture, pulsing subtly as though alive. The floor beneath me was surprisingly smooth, worn by what must have been centuries of use. The approaching lights resolved into crude torches, held by two of the smaller creatures. They moved with that same unnatural grace I had witnessed in the forest, their naked bodies covered in ritualistic markings, not tattoos, but raised welts in geometric patterns that suggested self-mutilation. Behind them came others, at least a dozen, filing into the chamber in eerie silence. Last came the tall one who had rendered me unconscious, now adorned with additional ornaments, bones and teeth and small animal skulls woven into its matted hair. It carried something in its hands, a bowl made from what appeared to be a human skull, its top sawn off and the interior lined with that same fibrous material. The tall one approached, its black eyes studying me with an intelligence that was somehow more terrifying than bestial rage would have been. It understood me, it knew what I was, and what I was thinking. I could feel its mind touching mine, probing at the edges of my consciousness like fingers testing the strength of a door. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cracking from thirst and fear. "Who are you?" The tall one tilted its head, considering me. Then it spoke, its voice a rasp like stone grinding against stone. "We are the Forgotten, and you are trespassing." The words hit me like physical blows, not because of their meaning, but because they existed at all. These creatures could speak. They had language, identity, purpose. "I'm a park ranger," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I protect the forest. I'm not trespassing." A sound emerged from the tall one's throat, a dry, rattling noise that might have been laughter. "Your kind has forgotten what it means to protect. You build your roads and your towers. You cut down the ancient ones. You poison the waters. And you call this protection?" It dipped a finger into the skull bowl, drawing out a thick, dark substance. With deliberate movements, it began to trace symbols on my forehead, my cheeks, my chin. The substance burned where it touched my skin, not with heat but with a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to reach into my bones. "We remember," it continued, its face inches from mine. "We remember when your kind lived in fear of the dark places, when you understood your place in the order of things, before you forgot." "What are you going to do to me?" I asked, unable to keep the tremor from my voice. The tall one stepped back, surveying its handiwork. "We are going to help you remember." It raised the bowl above its head and began to chant in that same guttural language I had heard in the forest. The others joined in, their voices blending into a sound like rushing water or distant thunder. The organic material around me seemed to respond, pulsing in time with their chanting, tightening and then relaxing around my limbs. From the shadows emerged two more creatures, carrying between them what looked like a crude litter woven from the same fibrous material. On it lay a collection of plants, flowers, roots, and fungi I didn't recognize, though my ranger training had included extensive botanical knowledge of the region. The tall one selected a pale, luminescent mushroom from the collection. It crushed the fungus in its long fingers, releasing spores that glowed briefly in the torchlit air before settling on my face. I tried to hold my breath, but the need for oxygen eventually forced me to inhale. The spores burned in my lungs, spreading fire through my veins. Vision blurred. The chanting grew louder, seeming to come from inside my own head now. The walls of the chamber appeared to breathe, expanding and contracting like a massive lung. The creatures' forms shifted and flowed, sometimes appearing human, sometimes animal, sometimes something else entirely. Time lost meaning. Minutes or hours or days might have passed as I lay there, my mind unraveling under the influence of whatever I had inhaled. Visions came and went. Sarah's face, twisted with the same inhuman features as my captors. My father, emerging from the organic walls with fungi growing from his eye sockets. The forest above, its roots reaching down through the earth to wrap around my body. Through it all, the tall one watched, its black eyes reflecting nothing. Occasionally it would speak, not in its rasping voice but directly into my mind. "Remember, remember what you are. Remember what came before. And more than two." Now at this point, fear began gripping my heart as I lashed out against my binds once again, only to find they hadn't been loosened in the slightest. Or so I thought. We'll get to that in a moment. I was hauled from my small prison by several sets of long-clawed hands that dragged over what appeared to be some kind of altar. It was a much different from one of those sacrificial altars. Appearing to be used in ancient times for rituals, meant to appease unworldly beings, were said to lurk within the space between two worlds. But this one seemed more like a place where people got together for satanic worship or other unholy activities. These beings holding me lured me down onto it and began weaving this sort of flower. The altar stone was cold against my back, the surface worn smooth by what must have been countless similar ceremonies. As my hallucinations began to fade, leaving behind a terrible clarity, I could see that the chamber had transformed, or perhaps I was seeing it truly for the first time. The space was vast, much larger than I had initially perceived, with a ceiling that rose at least 30 feet above the altar. The walls were lined with niches, each containing what appeared to be offerings, personal effects that I recognized with horror as belonging to hikers and campers. Watches, cameras, wallets, wedding rings, tokens of those who had disappeared in the park over the years. The creatures, the Forgotten, as their leader had named them, surrounded the altar in concentric circles, swaying in perfect unison. The tall one stood at my head, its hands raised toward the ceiling where a natural chimney in the rock allowed a single shaft of moonlight to penetrate the darkness. "The cycle continues," it intoned, and the others repeated the phrase in that same grinding language. "The old ways endure. The forest remembers even when man forgets." They began weaving elaborate patterns with the flowers and plants, starting at my feet and working their way up my body. Each plant was placed with precise care, the pattern clearly significant in ways I couldn't comprehend. Some of the flowers I recognized: trillium, wild ginger, bleeding heart, native species that grew in the darkest parts of the forest. Others were entirely unknown to me, with impossible colors and shapes that seemed to shift when viewed directly. All around me while chanting something in this ungodly language. I was so terrified I swear I could have had a heart attack. I couldn't make out all the words, but I had no idea what this thing was or what they were saying. The entire group of these things began chanting in unison as they surrounded me, continued weaving more of this plant material around me. It felt like forever. The tall one produced a bone knife, its edge honed to razor sharpness. My heart seized with terror as it approached, but instead of cutting me, it used the knife to slice its own palm. Dark blood welled from the wound, almost black in the dim light. It held its hand over my face, allowing 3 drops to fall onto my forehead. "You will carry our mark," it said, its voice penetrating my skull like a physical force. "You will remember, and you will speak of what you have seen. The others will not believe, but the seed will be planted. The old fear will grow again." The blood burned where it touched my skin, sinking into the pores as though alive. I could feel it spreading beneath the surface, tracing patterns through my veins, reaching toward my heart. I screamed then, a sound of pure animal terror that echoed through the chamber and down the tunnels beyond. The Forgotten responded with sounds of their own, not mocking as I first thought, but joining me in a chorus of primal emotion that transcended language. It was communication in its most basic form, the expression of feeling without the filter of words. As our voices mingled in that underground space, something shifted in my perception. For a brief, terrifying moment I understood them. Not their words, but their existence. They were ancient, these creatures, remnants of something that had dwelled in these lands long before humans arrived. They had retreated underground as civilization spread, preserving their ways in these hidden places, emerging only to remind humanity of what had been forgotten. The tall one sensed my understanding and leaned closer, its black eyes inches from mine. "Yes," it whispered, its breath hot against my face. "Now you begin to see." It placed both hands on either side of my head, its long fingers tangling in my hair. The chanting rose to a crescendo, the words now seeming almost familiar, as though I had heard them in a dream or another life. The plants around me began to glow with a pale, greenish light that intensified with the chanting. Pain lanced through my skull as the tall one's fingers tightened. Images flooded my mind, the forest as it had been thousands of years ago, the first humans to encounter the forgotten, rituals much like this one conducted through centuries, the gradual retreat of the creatures as cities grew and wilderness shrank, their adaptation to life in the dark places beneath the earth. And with the images came understanding. They were not trying to kill me. They were changing me, marking me, making me a witness to their continued existence. I was to be released, to carry the memory of them back to the world above, a reminder that humans were not the first to claim this land, and that the old ways persisted in the shadows. Before they finally got to the last one, all I could do was just lay there on my back, completely immobilized by flowers, while these creatures circled around me once and turned their backs towards me. The chants stopped abruptly, and every creature but one turned to leave. The remaining one tossed this mask aside, revealing a set of devilish features underneath it. What I had been dealing with. The tall one stood alone beside the altar now, its followers having retreated into the shadows. It studied me with those bottomless eyes, and I had the unsettling sensation that it was memorizing my face, storing the image away in some ancient memory. "You will return to your world," it said, its voice softer now. "You will speak of what you have seen, and you will not be believed. This is as it should be. The truth remains strongest when it dwells in the realm of doubt." It reached down and began to undo the bindings of plants and fibers that held me to the altar. As each restraint was removed, feeling flooded back into my limbs with painful intensity. When the last binding fell away, the tall one stepped back, gesturing toward a dark opening in the chamber wall that I hadn't noticed before. "That way leads up," it said. "Follow it and do not stray from the path. Others of us are less accommodating to your kind." I sat up slowly, every muscle screaming in protest. The markings on my skin still burned, and when I touched my forehead, my fingers came away stained with a mixture of blood and some unidentifiable substance. The plants that had bound me were wilting already, their brief luminescence fading as they died. "Why me?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse from screaming. "Why did you choose me?" The tall one tilted its head, that same considering gesture I had seen before. "We did not choose you. You chose us when you came alone to our domain, but you are suitable. You walk between worlds already, not fully of the city, not fully of the wild, a bridge." It turned away, moving toward the shadows where its followers had disappeared. "Remember," it said without looking back, "and fear the dark places as your ancestors did. It will keep you alive." Then it was gone, leaving me alone on the altar in the dim light of the remaining torches. I struggled to my feet, swaying with weakness and the residual effects of whatever I had inhaled. The path the creature had indicated was barely visible, a slightly lighter shade of darkness against the chamber wall. I had no choice but to follow it. My equipment was gone. No flashlight, no radio, no weapon, just the clothes on my back and the burning marks on my skin that seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. The tunnel was narrow, forcing me to crouch as I moved forward. The walls were slick with moisture, occasionally breaking open into smaller chambers or branching passages. I kept to the main path as instructed, though several times I heard movements and whispers from these side tunnels that made my skin crawl. Time lost meaning in that lightless labyrinth. I might have walked for hours or days, guided only by the faint phosphorescence of fungi growing on the tunnel ceiling. My mind fluctuated between crystal clarity and hallucinatory confusion, the tall one's blood still working its way through my system. Eventually, the tunnel began to slope upward, the air growing fresher with each step. Hope kindled in my chest. I was nearing the surface. The path grew steeper, changing from smooth stone to rough-hewn steps cut into the living rock. My legs trembled with exhaustion as I climbed, but the promise of escape drove me onward. Looked like a combination of wild, feral human beings and kind of goblinish people. You know what it kind of reminded me of? The trolls or orcs in Lord of the Rings. Humanoid, feral-looking, but also not human. That's what they reminded me of. It stood there, shaking its head from side to side, slowly with its arms raised upward as I tried to break free. Now, again, I cannot reiterate how terrifying this was. I had no idea what was going to happen, and I was convinced in that moment I was about to be sacrificed by some sort of under-cave-dwelling creatures. I was so scared beyond belief. Then this thing pulled its arm down after shaking its head and walked away. Completely immobilized, I tried my best to get out of my entrapment. The final creature disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone with my terror and the slowly loosening plant bindings. Whatever ritual they had performed seemed to have altered the properties of the material. What had been impossibly strong now began to give way under my desperate struggles. I worked first at freeing my right hand, wiggling my fingers until I could grip the edge of the binding. It peeled away reluctantly, the fibers seeming almost reluctant to release their hold on my skin. As soon as my hand was free, I tore at the restraints across my chest and then my other limbs. And I believe it was the massive amounts of adrenaline exploding through my entire being that allowed me to break free. As I did, though, I could hear these things coming back, and I knew I had to escape as quick as I could. Once fully free, I started to run for it, escaping in just a matter of time, feeling my way out of this black organic labyrinth. I don't know if I was in a cave or what this was, but as I reflect back on these memories, sounds echoed through the tunnels, the shuffle of bare feet on stone, the rasping breath of creatures moving in the darkness. They were returning, perhaps sensing that their captive was attempting escape. Fear gave me new strength as I stumbled forward, hands outstretched to feel the way through the pitch-black passage. The tunnel forked and I hesitated, trying to recall which way I had been brought. A dim glow emanated from the left-hand passage. Not the warm light of torches, but the cold, pale illumination of those phosphorescent fungi. I chose that path, reasoning that the fungi needed at least some connection to the surface to survive. The passage narrowed, the ceiling dropping so low that I was forced to crawl. The stone floor abraded my palms and knees, but I pressed on, driven by the sounds of pursuit that grew steadily louder behind me. The air grew fresher, carrying the scent of pine and clean earth. The surface couldn't be far now. Ahead, a faint gray light beckoned, starlight filtering through some opening. I redoubled my efforts, ignoring the pain of scraped skin and overtaxed muscles. The passage ended in a vertical shaft, perhaps 10 feet high, with roots dangling from its earthen walls. Above, I could see a patch of night sky framed by the twisted shapes of tree roots. The sounds behind me grew louder. Clicks and hisses, the scrabble of claws on stone. They were almost upon me. With desperate strength, I began to climb, grasping at roots and digging my fingers into the earthen walls of the shaft. Dirt showered down as I pulled myself upward. Each inch gained a victory over gravity and exhaustion. A hand closed around my ankle, cold, strong fingers digging into my flesh. I kicked blindly, connecting with something solid. A shriek of pain echoed through the shaft, and the grip released. I scrambled higher, my hands finally reaching the edge of the opening above. With one final surge of strength, I pulled myself through the gap and into the cool night air of the forest. I lay there for a moment, gasping, the loamy soil against my face the sweetest sensation I had ever experienced. But there was no time to rest. Clawed hands were already reaching through the opening, grasping at air. I staggered to my feet, trying to orient myself. The forest was unfamiliar in the darkness, but the stars above provided some guidance. The North Star hung low on the horizon. I needed to head south to reach the ranger station. I began to run, crashing through underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms. Behind me, inhuman cries rose from the earth as the creatures emerged from their underground domain. The hunt was on. I ran as I had never run before, ignoring the protests of my battered body. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent fresh waves of terror through me. They knew these woods far better than I did, even in darkness. The trees began to thin, and ahead I could see the gleam of moonlight on water, the lake. I had somehow circled back to Lake Oroville. New hope surged through me. I knew this area, could find my way from here. The ranger station was 5 miles south along the lakeshore. A figure loomed suddenly from the darkness, blocking my path. One of the creatures, its black eyes reflecting starlight. I skidded to a halt, casting about desperately for a weapon. My hand closed around a fallen branch, and I swung it with all my remaining strength. The branch connected with a sickening crack, and the creature fell. I didn't wait to see if it would rise again, instead plunging onward toward the lake. More shapes moved in the forest around me, converging on my position. The lakeshore was only yards away now, if I could reach the water. My foot caught on an exposed root, sending me sprawling. Pain exploded in my ankle, but adrenaline pushed it aside. I scrambled forward on hands and knees, then forced myself upright again. The lakeshore was before me, a narrow strip of pebbly beach leading to the dark water beyond. I splashed into the shallows just as the creatures reached the tree line. They halted there, hissing and clicking in what seemed like frustration. One stepped forward, the tall one, its necklace of teeth gleaming in the moonlight. "Remember," it called, its rasping voice carrying clearly across the water. "Remember and fear." I waded deeper, the cold water now at my waist. The creatures remained at the shoreline, watching with those terrible black eyes. They would not follow me into the water, I realized. Whether from inability or some taboo, I didn't know and didn't care. The lake offered safety. I dove forward, striking out with powerful strokes toward the center of the lake. The water was bitter cold, sapping my strength, but I forced myself to continue. Behind me, the creature's cries faded, replaced by the gentle lapping of waves against my ears. I swam until my arms felt like lead, then rolled onto my back to float, staring up at the star-filled sky. The full moon illuminated the lake like a spotlight, turning the water to liquid silver. In that moment of exhaustion and relief, a strange calm settled over me. I had survived. Whatever the forgotten had done to me, whatever their purpose, I had escaped. When I felt strength returning to my limbs, I turned and swam for the southern shore, toward the ranger station. Each stroke was agony, my muscles protesting after the ordeal they had endured. But the pain was real, human pain, not the otherworldly burning of the creature's markings. My feet touched bottom eventually, and I dragged myself onto the shore, collapsing on the rocky beach. Dawn was breaking, the eastern sky lightening to pearl gray. I lay there watching the sun rise, feeling its warmth on my face like a benediction. I had almost convinced myself that the whole experience had been some vivid hallucination. Perhaps I'd eaten something toxic, or suffered a head injury in a fall, when I caught sight of my reflection in a still pool of water near the shore. Dark markings covered my face, swirling patterns that pulsed slightly with each heartbeat. The tall one's blood had left its mark, just as it had promised. I had no recollection of how I managed to reach the ranger station. Park visitors found me stumbling along the main trail, delirious and babbling about underground creatures. By the time the medical team arrived, I had lost consciousness. I had so much flooding through my mind I feel like I kind of blacked out. I don't really know if I remember much after that, but I do distinctly remember collapsing on the ground and being found later on. I know that's probably very anticlimactic, but when the human body endures that kind of trauma, stress, it does things to the brain that aren't exactly normal. Anyway, I was treated at the hospital. I awoke in a hospital bed 3 days later, an IV dripping fluids into my arm and monitoring equipment beeping steadily beside me. Jenkins sat in a chair by the window, his weathered face lined with concern. When he saw I was awake, he moved to my bedside. "Welcome back, Miller," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "You had us worried." "The creatures," I began, my voice a dry rasp. "The forgotten. Did you find—" "Easy now," he interrupted, pouring a cup of water from a pitcher on the bedside table. "The doctor said you were suffering from severe dehydration, exhaustion, and possible hallucinogenic effects from an unidentified fungal toxin. There were spores in your lungs like nothing they've ever seen before." I tried to sit up, but weakness forced me back against the pillows. It wasn't hallucinations. They were real. They took me underground, performed some kind of ritual. Jenkins' expression shifted to one I would come to know well in the days that followed, a mixture of pity and discomfort. "We found evidence that you'd made camp near the eastern shore of the lake. Then something happened. Your gear was scattered, signs of a struggle. We think you might have been attacked by an animal, fell into the lake, and washed up on the southern shore. The toxins could have entered your system through an open wound." "The markings," I insisted, raising a hand to my face. "They're still there, the tall one's blood. But my fingers found only smooth skin, unmarked save for a few scratches from my flight through the forest." Jenkins shook his head slowly. "There were no markings when we found you, Miller. Just dirt, blood from some minor cuts, and what looked like plant residue. The doctors cleaned you up." I fell silent, confusion and doubt beginning to creep into my certainty. Had it all been a hallucination? A toxic reaction to some unknown fungus, combined with the emotional stress of Sarah's rejection and my isolation in the forest, ultimately taken back to the station and sent home. I didn't actually believe what I experienced first. I thought it was some crude nightmare or horrible hallucination. But it wasn't until later that I realized it must have been something that really happened, because I actually had binding marks around my ankles, my thighs, my waist, and my wrists. Those bindings were on tight. The medical report noted ligature marks consistent with restrictive binding, but attributed them to possible self-entanglement in climbing ropes or fishing line during my delirium. No one would consider the alternative, that I had been bound with living plant material by creatures that shouldn't exist. I was placed on medical leave for 6 weeks, with mandatory counseling sessions twice weekly. The department psychologist listened patiently to my story before diagnosing me with acute stress disorder, possibly triggered by my recent breakup and exacerbated by isolation and exposure to unknown toxins. "The mind is remarkably creative when processing trauma," she explained during our 3rd session. "It constructs narratives to make sense of experiences too difficult to process directly. These underground creatures could represent your fears about the relationship ending, being dragged down into dark emotions, feeling bound by your attachments." Her interpretation made a certain logical sense, but it couldn't explain everything. The specific details of the forgotten, their appearance, their rituals, their strange language, seemed too elaborate, too consistent, to be mere fabrications of a stressed mind. And then there were the dreams. They began a week after my return home. Vivid dreams of underground chambers, of the tall one watching me with those bottomless black eyes, of plants growing from my skin like living tattoos. I would wake, gasping, certain that the markings had returned, only to find my skin unmarked in the harsh light of my bedside lamp. But sometimes, in certain lights or at certain angles, I would catch glimpses in the mirror of patterns beneath my skin, flowing like dark water through my veins. They would vanish when I looked directly, leaving me questioning my own perception, and I must have wiggled free enough that I loosened them. Like I said, whatever the bindings were this crude rope vine material. I've never seen it before in my life. None of them really believed me, though, when I actually got a chance to describe what happened. They thought I was either making it up or just had a bad nightmare. As you can probably bet, this incident has been difficult for me. At any rate, this is my story. I returned to duty after 2 months, but things were different. Jenkins assigned me to the visitor center rather than patrol duties, citing concerns about my recovery process. My fellow Rangers treated me with a careful politeness that barely masked their discomfort. Word had spread about my breakdown in the woods. Sarah called once, awkwardly expressing concern about what she'd heard. "Mom knows someone at the hospital," she explained. "She told me you were found wandering in the woods, talking about underground people or something." The conversation was brief and painful, confirming that whatever we had shared was truly over. I requested a transfer to another park at the end of that season. Jenkins approved it with obvious relief, writing a carefully worded recommendation that emphasized my dedication and knowledge of park systems while avoiding any mention of my experience at Lake Oroville. My new posting was at a small desert preserve in Arizona, about as different from the forests of Northern California as possible. No ancient trees, no dark undergrowth, no hidden caves. Just open sky and sun-baked earth that held no secrets beneath its surface, or so I believed. It was during my 3rd month there that I found the petroglyphs in a remote canyon. Ancient rock art, estimated to be at least 20 years old according to the park archaeologist. Most depicted familiar scenes: hunters, animals, rain symbols. But on one sheltered panel, partially hidden behind a boulder, was a series of figures that stopped my breath in my throat. Elongated bodies, oversized heads with large dark eyes, long fingers ending in claws, and around them, rendered in the same red ochre, were swirling patterns identical to the markings I had seen on my own skin in the mirror. The archaeologist dismissed them as stylized, shamanic figures representing the spirit world, but I knew better. The forgotten weren't unique to Oroville. They had been here all along, retreating underground as human civilization spread across the continent, preserving their ancient ways in the dark places beneath the earth. I've been researching ever since, carefully and quietly. Ancient myths about subterranean people, unexplained disappearances in national parks, indigenous legends about the old ones who lived in caves and emerged only at night. The patterns are there for those willing to see them, and I hope you can get enjoyment from a real-life traumatic event. I don't care if you believe me, and if you choose to read this, which, by the way, you have permission to, I don't care if your readers believe me. I know there's something out there that lives underneath the ground, something that isn't quite human. Sometimes, on nights when the moon is full, I feel the markings burning beneath my skin. I wake from dreams of underground chambers and ritual chants with the Tall One's final words echoing in my mind. Remember, and fear the dark places. I do remember, and I do fear. But I also understand now what the Tall One meant when it called me a bridge. I stand between worlds, the rational, daylight world of ranger stations and visitor centers, and the ancient, shadow world of the forgotten. I've never returned to Lake Oroville. My personnel file contains a medical restriction against posting me there, a bureaucratic blessing in disguise. But sometimes I wonder if the forgotten are waiting for me, if the Tall One looks up from the darkness beneath the ancient trees and remembers the human who carried its mark back to the world above. Perhaps it's watching even now as I write these words, fulfilling the purpose it set for me in that underground chamber, to speak of what I've seen, to plant the seed of old fear in those who listen, to remind humanity that we were not the first to claim this land, and that the old ways persist in the shadows. Remember, and fear the dark places as your ancestors did. It will keep you alive. I was a national park ranger. Here are some of the things I encountered. So here I am. I'm Samantha Parker, Sam to everyone who knows me, and I was a park ranger for 6 years at one of America's most visited national parks. I won't specify where, as I don't want to get in trouble or give the place a bad reputation it doesn't deserve. One of the people I worked with recently told me to read the other park ranger stories online, so I thought I'd give it a shot. Is it odd to see someone being honest about what happens out there? These stories inspired me to share my own experiences. People need to know what happens in the woods. I quit my job a couple years ago. I couldn't deal with having to bottle up all the things I've seen. Nobody wants to talk about them, but I feel I'm drowning in the memories of it all, so I'm going to share them. I don't know if I'll be able to share everything. It might be too hard, but I'll give it a go. I hope this raises some awareness of the true danger of the woods and makes people consider their safety. I don't want people to think I'm copying someone or making these things up. I'm just sharing my stories and experiences. Most rangers have stories they won't tell. Mine just happened to be particularly disturbing. I grew up near the edge of the park where I eventually worked. The forest was my sanctuary as a kid. I spent endless summer days exploring the trails near our home, watching deer graze in meadows, and learning to identify the calls of various birds. My father, who worked as a guide for tourists, taught me everything he knew about surviving in the wilderness. He'd been a Marine before settling down, and he made sure I understood that nature was to be respected, not feared. That changed when I was 16. Dad took me on a weekend backpacking trip deeper into the park than we'd ever gone before. On the second night, we were sitting by our campfire when all the nighttime sounds, the crickets, the distant hoots of owls, the rustle of nocturnal animals suddenly stopped. The silence was absolute, pressing against my eardrums like a physical thing. "Don't move," Dad whispered, his hand reaching slowly for his hunting knife. "Something's watching us." I couldn't see anything beyond the circle of firelight, but I felt it, a presence, heavy and ancient, studying us from the darkness. We stayed frozen like that for nearly an hour until, without warning, the forest sounds resumed as if someone had flipped a switch. Dad never explained what happened that night. He packed up our camp at first light, and we hiked out in tense silence. When I asked him about it later, he just said, "Some things out there don't have names, Sam, and they're best left alone." I should have heeded that warning. Instead, it sparked a fascination that eventually led me to become a ranger. I wanted to understand the mysteries of the forest, to learn its secrets. I was 23, fresh out of college with a degree in environmental science, when I entered the ranger training program. The training was rigorous wilderness, survival, first aid, law enforcement, search and rescue. They prepared us for everything from lost hikers to wildlife encounters to forest fires. But nothing in those manuals or training sessions prepared me for what I would actually face in those woods. This was my first ever weird experience as a junior ranger. To this day, I still don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't friendly. I had just received a call about screams coming from deeper in the forest off one of the more popular trails. This really wasn't unusual. If you've heard a mountain lion, you know it sounds like a woman screaming. So just as I was about to set off, my chief at the time, Ranger Jenkins, asked to come along. I found this a little odd as the job seemed a bit too insignificant for his rank, but I brushed it off as I was new and thought maybe he wanted to check my progress. We set off making small talk, and I was obviously trying to suck up a little. We were joking around when he made a quick remark and said something about making sure that I take even these small jobs seriously, because you'll never know what you'll find. And that was some of the most valuable advice I've gotten from someone on this job, because I learned my lesson from not listening to it, but that's a different story. We get to the area where the call was made and begin north of the trail where the noise had been heard. We hear the screams and it sounds like a mountain lion, but something sounds really off about it. The pitch was slightly wrong, the cadence unnatural, but we keep walking towards it. We're about 10 minutes into walking towards the sound, when all of a sudden it's like all the sound had been sucked from the woods. It was dead silent. I couldn't even hear my breathing. I thought maybe I'd gone deaf, but I look at Jenkins, and he had the same nervous expression on his face as I did. But by the way he was reacting, it felt as if he had dealt with something similar before, which I now know to be true. Just as quick as the silence came, I started to hear this low buzzing. But it wasn't just buzzing. I could feel the vibration of it in my whole body, so much so that my ears and jaws started to hurt. I can only describe it as if when you are getting your teeth drilled at the dentist, but it felt even worse. Even my vision started to vibrate, and as that happened, I swear I saw this black figure about 7 feet tall step out from a few trees in front of me and start with that same scream as it bent down and began to crawl towards us. Its movements were all wrong, jerky and fluid at the same time, like watching a spider move in stop motion. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, and though I couldn't make out any features in that black mass, I felt it watching me. I felt it hungry for me. As anyone would, I freaked out and stepped back to start running. Jenkins grabbed my arm very hard just as I started to sprint, almost knocking me over. He put his other arm around me and held my arms very tight as he began to walk me out of the forest. Just as I'm about to put up a fight and tell him to run, he says in a very calm voice, "Don't run, don't talk, don't look back, just keep walking." And I did exactly what he said. He knew something I didn't, and as much as I wanted to run, I didn't want to test the theory of death. That 10-minute walk was excruciating because I knew it was crawling behind us by the buzzing in the back of my head and the sound of its light wailing. I wanted to run so bad. My muscles were locked in rigid terror, every instinct screaming at me to sprint away as fast as I could. But Jenkins's grip was iron, and his calm voice anchored me to sanity. Eventually, I think it ran off because all the noise in the forest came back and the buzzing stopped. We get back on the trail and I'm shaking. I was in so much shock I couldn't even cry. He lets go of me and begins walking back to main base without acknowledging what happened. I start going crazy and screaming at him, asking what the hell that was, and he says, and yes, I remember word for word what he said. "There are things in these woods that have been here longer than us that we can't explain or get rid of. If you don't think you can handle it, you should pack your bags now." He kept walking, and I walked a bit behind, trying to shake that horrible feeling and tried to find a reasonable answer for what just happened. There was none. Science couldn't explain what I'd seen. Logic failed me. I'd have thought I was hallucinating if Jenkins hadn't clearly seen it too. I clearly stayed in the job. When it was good, it was really good. I met some amazing people and I loved nature. But in the end, the bad experiences outweighed the good, and I had to leave. I wish I had left when he told me to pack my bags, in all honesty. I know this experience doesn't sound all that scary, but trust me, there are worse ones. Living through it was definitely much scarier than reading it in words, and it was just the beginning. 3 months after my first encounter, I was starting to think it had been a one-time thing, maybe a trick of the light, a mountain lion with some weird disease, and my mind filling in the gaps with horror. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Jenkins never mentioned it again. Whenever I tried to bring it up, he'd change the subject or suddenly remember an urgent task he needed to handle. The other rangers were friendly enough, but they kept a professional distance that I couldn't quite breach. I was still the new girl, still proving myself. It was early June when the first reports of missing hikers came in. A young couple, Marcus and Elena Brewer, had set out on a 3-day trek along the Eastern Ridge Trail. They were experienced hikers who had checked in properly and had all the right equipment. When they didn't check back in on schedule, we launched a standard search and rescue operation. I was paired with Ranger Lisa Martinez, a veteran with 15 years on the job. She was tough and no-nonsense, with short salt and pepper hair and the kind of leathery tan that comes from a lifetime outdoors. We were assigned to search a section of the trail where the couple's cell phone had last pinged a tower before losing signal. "Stay close," Martinez told me as we parked our vehicle at the trailhead. "This area gets tricky after the first mile." The day was perfect, clear blue skies, temperature in the mid-70s, a light breeze carrying the scent of pine. Hikers and tourists passed us on the trail, nodding and smiling, completely unaware of our mission. After about an hour, the crowd thinned out as the trail became steeper and more challenging. "Most tourists turn back here," Martinez explained. "From this point on, we're likely to only see serious hikers." But we didn't see anyone else for the next 2 hours. The trail grew more rugged, with loose rocks and exposed roots threatening to trip us up if we weren't careful. Martinez moved with the sure-footed confidence of someone who knew every inch of this terrain. We were about 4 miles in when I noticed something odd about the forest around us. The trees seemed to be leaning away from a particular area off the trail to our right. "Martinez," I called out, pointing. "Look at those trees. Does that seem natural to you?" She stopped, frowning as she followed my gaze. "Huh. Wind damage maybe, or some kind of fungal infection affecting their growth." But I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe her own explanation. "Should we check it out?" I asked. "The missing hikers could have gone off trail." Martinez hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Stay behind me, and keep your radio handy." We picked our way carefully through the underbrush. The ground sloped gently downward, leading us into a small ravine I hadn't been able to see from the trail. The trees continued their strange pattern, all leaning away from the center of the ravine as if trying to escape something. The air grew noticeably colder as we descended. In the middle of June, in the middle of the day, I could suddenly see my breath fogging in front of me. Martinez noticed it too and stopped. "This isn't right," she muttered, her hand moving to the pepper spray on her belt to her first line of defense against aggressive wildlife. That's when I saw a tent, partially collapsed, in the center of the ravine. The same bright blue tent that had been described in the missing hiker's equipment list. "Martinez," I whispered, pointing. She nodded grimly. "I see it. Let's approach carefully." We moved slowly toward the tent, calling out as we went. "Park rangers. Marcus? Elena? Are you there?" No response. The tent was in bad shape, with one of the poles broken and the fabric torn in several places. But it wasn't the kind of damage an animal would do. It looked more like someone or something had methodically pulled it apart, piece by piece. Martinez knelt by the entrance and carefully unzipped it. "Hello? Anyone in there?" Empty, but their sleeping bags were still inside, along with a backpack. Martinez reached for the backpack, then hesitated. "This is a crime scene now," she said. "We shouldn't disturb anything further. Let's call it in." She stood up and reached for her radio, then froze. I followed her gaze and felt my blood turn to ice. About 20 feet away, partially hidden by a fallen log, was a boot, a hiking boot, with a foot still in it. Martinez drew her sidearm, something I'd never seen any ranger actually do before. "Stay behind me," she ordered, her voice tight. We approached the boot slowly. As we got closer, I realized with growing horror that it wasn't attached to a body. It had been severed cleanly at the ankle. "Oh God," I whispered. Martinez's face had gone pale beneath her tan. "We need to get out of here. Now." That's when I noticed the silence. Just like that day with Jenkins, all sound had vanished from the forest. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves despite the breeze I could still feel on my skin. And then came the buzzing. I grabbed Martinez's arm. "We need to go, right now." She looked at me sharply. "You've experienced this before." It wasn't a question. "Yes, don't run. Just walk steadily back to the trail." To her credit, Martinez didn't waste time asking questions. She nodded once and we began walking, shoulder to shoulder, back the way we had come. The buzzing grew louder, more intense, vibrating through my skull until I thought my teeth might shatter. "Don't look back," I whispered, remembering Jenkins' advice. "Whatever you do, don't look back." But Martinez didn't listen. She glanced over her shoulder, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. "Jesus Christ," she hissed. "What the hell is that thing?" "Keep walking," I urged, fighting the temptation to look back myself. "It won't follow us to the trail." "How do you know that?" I didn't, not really, but it had seemed to be the case with Jenkins, and it was the only hope I had to cling to. The buzzing grew almost unbearable as we neared the edge of the ravine. My vision was blurring, dark spots dancing at the edges. Martinez stumbled and I caught her arm. "Almost there," I encouraged, though my own legs felt like they might give out at any moment. And then, suddenly, we were back on the trail, and the buzzing stopped. The forest sounds returned, birds calling, insects humming, leaves rustling. Martinez bent over, hands on her knees, breathing hard. What the hell was that?" she gasped. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I've seen it before, or something like it." She straightened up, her face grim. "We need to report this, all of it." But when we got back to headquarters and filed our report complete with the location of the tent and the severed foot, the response was strange. Chief Ranger Daniel Wilson, Jenkins' superior, listened to our account with an impassive face, then simply said, "I'll send a team to recover the remains." No questions about the buzzing, the silence, the thing Martinez had seen when she looked back. Nothing. Later that evening, Martinez found me in the break room, her expression troubled. "They're saying it was a bear attack," she said quietly. "That's the official report." "But there were no bear signs," I protested. "No tracks, no scat, nothing." She nodded. "I know. And no bear cuts like that so clean you could use it for surgery." She glanced around to make sure we were alone, then leaned closer. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened, is it?" I hesitated, then told her about my experience with Jenkins. Martinez listened without interrupting, her face growing more solemn by the minute. When I finished, she sighed heavily. "I've been here 15 years, Parker. I've seen some strange things, but nothing like what we saw today. Something's wrong in this forest, and she jerked her head toward the direction of Wilson's office. They know about it." "What do we do?" I asked. She ran a hand through her short hair. "Keep our eyes open, watch our backs, and maybe," she hesitated, "maybe start keeping a private record of these incidents. Something tells me the official reports aren't telling the whole story." That night I started a journal. I wrote down everything I could remember about both encounters, every detail, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. I didn't know what I was dealing with, but I knew instinctively that knowledge was my only defense. What I didn't know then was how quickly that journal would fill up, or how much I would come to dread adding new entries to it. By my second year as a ranger, I'd developed a reputation. Not official on paper, I was a model employee, efficient and thorough. But among my fellow rangers, whispers followed me. They called me Strange Sam, behind my back, claimed I was bad luck on patrols. Only Martinez treated me normally, and even she grew distant after our experience in the ravine. The missing hiker's case was officially closed as a bear attack, despite the inconsistencies. The remains that were recovered, just the 1 foot, and, later, some fragments of bone were eventually identified as Marcus Brewer. Elena was never found. Their families held a joint memorial service that several rangers, including myself, attended. I couldn't look their parents in the eye. In the months that followed, I became obsessed with researching similar incidents. On my days off, I'd drive to libraries in neighboring towns to access newspaper archives, searching for patterns. Missing hikers, strange animal attacks, unexplained phenomena in the park. I found more than I expected. In 1978, an entire family of 4 disappeared on a camping trip. Their vehicle was found at a trailhead, their campsite apparently abandoned mid-meal, food still cooking on a portable stove. In 1986, a wildlife photographer was found dead in a remote area, his body mutilated in ways that the official report attributed to multiple animal predation. In 1995, 2 park rangers went missing during a routine patrol. One was found 3 days later, alive but incoherent, babbling about the watchers in the trees. He was committed to a psychiatric facility and committed suicide 6 months later. His partner was never found. The incidents weren't frequent, maybe one every few years, but they formed a pattern that stretched back to the earliest days of the park, and they seemed to be increasing in frequency. It was around this time that I started noticing them, the silent watchers. I'd be on patrol, miles from any trail, and get the distinct feeling I was being observed. I'd turn quickly, trying to catch whatever it was, but would see nothing but trees and undergrowth. Yet the feeling would persist, a prickling awareness at the back of my neck, an absolute certainty that something intelligent was studying me. I mentioned it once to Jenkins, who had been promoted to a desk job after Wilson retired. He gave me a long, measuring look. "How often?" he asked. "Almost every patrol now," I admitted, "especially in the eastern sector." He nodded slowly. "Stay out of the eastern sector when you can. Stick to the main trails. And Parker, don't go out alone if you can help it." "What are they, Jenkins? What's out there?" He shook his head. "I don't know, not for certain. But I've heard stories passed down from the indigenous people who lived here before the park was established. They believed these forests were home to entities, not ghosts, not exactly spirits in the way we think of them, more like manifestations of the land itself. Guardians, or perhaps predators. They called them those who watch from between." "Between what?" "Between worlds, I think. Between what we can perceive and what we can't." He sighed heavily. "Look, I'm not saying I believe all that, but I've seen enough in my time here to know there are things in these woods that don't fit into our understanding of nature." His words haunted me, especially as my encounters grew more frequent and more disturbing. In early spring of my 3rd year, I was assigned to check on a weather station in a remote part of the park. It was routine maintenance: download the data, replace the batteries, make sure everything was functioning properly. A day trip, 6 hours round-trip hiking at most. The morning was misty, the kind of heavy fog that muffles sound and limits visibility to a few yards. I didn't think much of it. The weather station was on high ground, and I expected to climb above the fog within an hour. But the fog didn't lift. If anything, it grew thicker as I ascended. By mid-morning, I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. I kept checking my GPS to make sure I was still on course. The usual forest sounds were dampened by the fog, creating an eerie silence broken only by the crunch of my boots on the path and my own breathing. I was about 2 hours in when I realized I could hear something else, footsteps, matching my pace, somewhere off to my right in the mist. I stopped. The footsteps continued for a couple of beats, then stopped too. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" No response. Just the heavy silence of the fog-shrouded forest. I started walking again. So did the footsteps. I stopped. They stopped, but this time a fraction of a second too late. My heart rate kicked up. "This is Park Ranger Parker," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. "Identify yourself." Nothing. I unclipped the pepper spray from my belt, comforted by its familiar weight in my hand. I began walking again, faster now, and the footsteps kept pace. Sometimes they seemed to be on my right, sometimes on my left, sometimes directly behind me. But whenever I turned to look, there was nothing but fog. I broke into a jog, then a run, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The footsteps ran with me, gaining ground, coming closer. I could hear something else now, a strange, wet sound, like someone smacking their lips or tongue. The sound a predator makes when it's anticipating a meal. I ran blindly through the fog, no longer caring about staying on course, just desperate to get away from whatever was pursuing me. My foot caught on a root and I went down hard, sprawling on the damp ground, the pepper spray flying from my hand. I scrambled to my knees, searching frantically for the pepper spray in the underbrush. The footsteps had stopped. I froze, listening intently. Nothing. Then, slowly, I became aware of a presence directly in front of me. I couldn't see anything through the thick fog, but I could feel it there, watching me. The air grew cold, so cold that my breath came out in white clouds. That familiar buzzing started, vibrating through my skull. And then the fog parted, just for a moment, and I saw it. Not the tall black figure from my first encounter, but something worse. It had the general shape of a human, but elongated, stretched, with too many joints in its limbs. Its skin was a sickly, translucent white, stretched tight over visible bones. It had no face, just a smooth expanse of skin where features should be. But somehow, impossibly, I knew it was looking directly at me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Terror had me completely paralyzed. It took a step toward me, moving in that same wrong way, joints bending in directions they shouldn't. One long-fingered hand reached out, hovering just inches from my face. A gunshot cracked through the silence, deafeningly loud. The creature jerked back, the fog swirling around it. Another shot, and it retreated further, fading into the mist until it was gone. "Parker," a voice called from behind me. "Parker, where are you?" It was Martinez, appearing out of the fog with her sidearm drawn, scanning the area with professional efficiency. "Here," I managed to croak. "I'm here." She hurried over to me, helping me to my feet. "Are you hurt? Did it touch you?" I shook my head, still trembling. No, I'm fine. How did you know?" "Jenkins sent me after you. Said he had a bad feeling." She holstered her weapon, but kept her hand near it. "We need to get out of here, now." "But the weather station?" "Screw the weather station. It's not worth your life." We made our way back down the mountain, staying close together, alert for any sign of the creature. The fog began to thin as we descended, and by the time we reached the trailhead, it had lifted entirely, revealing a clear, sunny day that seemed to mock the horror of what I'd experienced. Back at headquarters, Martinez pulled me into an empty office. "What did you see up there?" she demanded. I described the creature as best I could. She listened intently, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "I've never seen that one before," she said when I finished. "The white thing. But I've seen others, different forms but the same presence, if that makes sense." "You've had encounters too? Why didn't you tell me?" She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Same reason nobody talks about it. Fear, denial. The knowledge that if we tried to report what's really happening, we'd be dismissed as crazy." She finally looked at me directly. "But they're getting bolder, Parker. Coming closer to the trails. Appearing in daylight now. Something's changing." "What did you shoot at up there?" I asked. "Did you hit it?" She laughed humorlessly. "I don't think conventional weapons can hurt these things, but they seem to dislike loud noises. The gunshots bought us some time, that's all. That night I added the encounter to my journal, which was growing thick with entries. Not all were my own experiences. I'd started collecting stories from other rangers too, those who would talk to me. A picture was forming, one that chilled me to the bone. Whatever these entities were, they were becoming more aggressive, more visible, more numerous. And no one outside our small circle of rangers seemed to know or care. My 4th year as a ranger brought changes. Jenkins retired, replaced by a new chief ranger from outside our park system, Eliza Thornton, a no-nonsense woman with short blonde hair and a reputation for by-the-book management. Within weeks, she had implemented new protocols, demanding more detailed reports and stricter adherence to regulations. "She's cleaning house," Martinez warned me one evening, looking for any excuse to get rid of people who don't fit her vision. I soon discovered what that meant. Rangers who had been willing to discuss the strange occurrences in the park suddenly clammed up, afraid of being labeled troublemakers or worse, mentally unstable. Thornton made it clear that she had no patience for campfire stories or superstitious nonsense. But the incidents continued, becoming impossible to ignore. That summer saw an unprecedented number of missing persons, case-shickers, campers, even a park volunteer. Most were eventually found, often disoriented and unable to account for lost time. Some weren't found at all. I kept my head down, did my job, and continued my private research. My journal had grown into 3 volumes now, and I'd started cross-referencing cases, mapping incident locations, looking for patterns. Martinez was my only confidant, and even she had grown more cautious about when and where we discussed our findings. It was late August when everything changed. A family of 4 parents and 2 teenage children went missing from a popular campground. Their tent was found intact, but there was a strange, dark stain on the ground inside, and their personal belongings were arranged in an unnatural, almost ritualistic pattern. I was part of the search team along with Martinez and 3 other rangers. Thornton herself came along, perhaps sensing that this case was different. We split into pairs to cover more ground, with Thornton partnering with me, much to my discomfort. She was all business as we hiked into the dense forest surrounding the campground, questioning me about my background and experience in a way that felt more like an interrogation than casual conversation. "You've been involved in a number of unusual incidents during your time here, Parker," she remarked as we paused at a stream to refill our water bottles. I chose my words carefully. "I've participated in several search and rescue operations, yes." "That's not what I meant." Her eyes, pale blue and penetrating, fixed on me. "Your name appears in reports involving circumstances that can't be easily explained. Hikers found miles from their last known locations with no memory of how they got there. Wildlife behaving erratically, unexplained sounds and phenomena." I said nothing, focusing on capping my water bottle. "Jenkins had quite a lot to say about you before he left," she continued. "He seemed to think you had some special insight into the unusual aspects of this park." "Jenkins had a tendency to dramatize routine situations," I said neutrally. "I'm just a ranger doing my job." She studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. "Let's keep moving. We're losing daylight." We pressed deeper into the forest, following a faint game trail that showed recent human footprints. The afternoon light filtered through the dense canopy, creating shifting patterns of shadow and light on the forest floor. As we walked, I became increasingly aware of a growing tension in the air, a heaviness that made it difficult to breathe. Thornton noticed it too. "Storm coming," she murmured, glancing at the patches of sky visible through the trees. But the sky was clear, no hint of clouds or brewing weather. The trail led us to a small clearing, perfectly circular, where the underbrush had been flattened as if by a great weight. In the center stood a single, dead tree, its bark blackened and peeling, its branches twisted into unnatural shapes. And hanging from those branches were items of clothing: a man's flannel shirt, a woman's sweater, 2 smaller t-shirts. The missing family's clothes, strung up like grotesque ornaments. "What the hell?" Thornton breathed, reaching for her radio. "This is Chief Ranger Thornton. We've found—" Her voice cut off abruptly as all sound vanished from the forest. That terrible, familiar silence descended, pressing against my eardrums. I grabbed her arm. "We need to leave. Now," I urged. She stared at me, then at the radio in her hand, which was emitting nothing but static. "What's happening?" "No time to explain. We need to go. Right now." The buzzing started, low at first, then rapidly increasing in intensity. I saw Thornton wince, her hand going to her ear. "What is that sound?" she demanded. "Please," I begged. "We have to go." But it was too late. At the edge of the clearing, the air seemed to ripple, to fold in on itself. And from that distortion emerged not one figure, but three, the tall black one from my first encounter, the faceless white one from the fog, and a new one, a hunched, multi-limbed thing that moved like a spider. Thornton's face drained of color. "Oh my God." "Don't run," I whispered urgently. "Whatever you do, don't run. Walk slowly back the way we came." To her credit, she didn't panic. She nodded once, her training kicking in despite the impossible horror before us. We began to back away, step by careful step. The entities watched us, their presence heavy with malevolence. The buzzing intensified until I could feel blood trickling from my nose, my ears. Thornton was bleeding too, her eyes wide with pain and fear. We had almost reached the edge of the clearing when the spider thing moved, faster than seemed possible, scuttling around to block our path. Thornton gasped, stumbling back. "Steady," I murmured. "There's another way out. Just follow me." I began edging to our right, toward a gap between the black figure and the white one. Thornton followed, her breathing shallow and rapid. The entities shifted, closing the gap. They were herding us, I realized with growing horror, herding us toward the dead tree in the center of the clearing. "Parker." Thornton's voice was barely audible over the buzzing. "What do they want?" "I don't know," I admitted. No one who found out ever came back to tell. We were running out of options. The entities had us nearly surrounded now, the only remaining gap leading straight back toward the tree. The buzzing had become so intense that my vision was blurring, dark spots dancing at the edges. That's when I noticed something about the tree. There was an opening at its base, a dark hollow large enough for a person to enter. And emanating from that hollow was a deeper darkness, a void that seemed to swallow the light around it. With sudden clarity, I understood what was happening. They weren't just herding us toward the tree, they were herding us toward whatever lay beyond that hollow, a doorway to somewhere else. "They're trying to take us," I gasped. "Like the others, the missing people." Thornton's face hardened with determination. She reached for her sidearm. "Like hell they are." "No," I grabbed her wrist. "Weapons don't work on them." "Maybe not," she agreed grimly. "But that tree looks plenty vulnerable." Before I could stop her, she raised her gun and fired not at the entities, but at the dead tree. Once, twice, 3 times, the shots deafeningly loud in the unnatural silence. The tree shuddered with each impact, dark splinters flying. On the 4th shot, something happened. A high, keening wail emanated from the hollow, a sound of such pure anguish that it drove me to my knees, hands clasped over my ears. The entities reacted immediately, converging on the tree with inhuman speed. In their distraction, the path behind us was momentarily clear. "Run," Thornton shouted, grabbing my arm and hauling me to my feet. "Now." We ran. Through the forest, crashing through underbrush, leaping over fallen logs, not caring about the noise we made or the branches that whipped at our faces and tore at our clothing. Behind us, that keening wail continued, accompanied now by a chorus of other sound hisses, screeches, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to shake the very ground. I don't know how long we ran. It felt like hours. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed in protest, but fear drove me onward. Thornton kept pace beside me, her face a mask of grim determination. Finally, we burst out onto a trail, not the one we had started on, but a trail nonetheless, marked and maintained. The normal sounds of the forest returned in a rush: birds, insects, the whisper of wind through leaves. The buzzing was gone. We collapsed on the trail, gasping for breath. Thornton's face was streaked with blood from her nose and ears, her uniform torn and dirty. I knew I looked no better. "What?" she panted. "What the hell were those things?" I shook my head. "I don't know. No one does. But they've been here as long as the park has existed, maybe longer." She stared at me, then at the forest around us, her worldview visibly crumbling. All those missing persons, the unexplained deaths. Not bears, not mountain lions, not accidents. I met her gaze steadily. Them. For a long moment she was silent, processing. Then she reached for her radio, which had begun working again as soon as we hit the trail. "This is Chief Ranger Thornton," she said, her voice remarkably composed given what we'd just experienced. "Officer down. Repeat, officer down. We need immediate extraction from trail marker 42. She clicked off the radio before anyone could respond. I stared at her in confusion. "Neither of us is down," I said. "They don't need to know that. But they'll come faster if they think one of us is injured." She wiped blood from her face with her sleeve. "And Parker? When they get here, we're going to tell them we were attacked by a mountain lion. That's all. Do you understand?" I understood perfectly. Even after what she'd seen, she wouldn't acknowledge the truth officially. The report would read like all the others: animal attack, perhaps with some unexplained aspects that would be conveniently overlooked. "You're going to cover it up," I said flatly, "just like all the others." She leaned forward, her voice low and intense. "Listen to me carefully. What we saw today, there's no place for it in any official report. No one would believe us. We'd lose our jobs, possibly be committed for psychiatric evaluation. And then what? Who would be left who knows the truth? Who would be able to protect people? Is that what we're doing?" I challenged. "Protecting people? By hiding the truth from them? We're protecting them the only way we can be being here, by knowing what to watch for, by keeping as many people away from the danger zones as possible." She gripped my arm. "The alternative is to go public, be dismissed as lunatics, and leave the park in the hands of people who don't know and can't see what's really out there." I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew she was right. We had no proof, no evidence that would stand up to scrutiny, just our word against decades of scientific understanding and rational explanation. That night, after giving our carefully sanitized report and being checked over by medical staff, Thornton came to my quarters. She looked different, smaller somehow, the confident chief ranger replaced by a woman grappling with a reality she'd never imagined possible. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "I thought you and the others were exaggerating, making excuses for failures or incompetence. I was wrong." I nodded, accepting her apology silently. "Jenkins left me a file," she continued, "about the incidents. I ignored it, thought it was just superstitious nonsense." She laughed bitterly. "Guess I should have read it more carefully." "It wouldn't have helped," I told her. "Nothing can really prepare you for what's out there." "No," she agreed. "But I want to see your research, your journals, everything you've collected. We need to understand what we're dealing with." I hesitated. "Why? So you can bury it deeper? So we can fight it?" She said fiercely. "Whatever these things are, they're getting bolder, more aggressive. We can't just keep covering up their existence and hoping for the best." "What are you suggesting?" "I don't know yet. But doing nothing is no longer an option." She straightened up, some of her authority returning. "Tomorrow, you and I are going to start putting together a real file. Everything we know, everything we've seen, everyone who's had an encounter, and then we're going to figure out how to stop these things before they take anyone else." I should have been encouraged by her determination. Instead, I felt a growing sense of dread. In all my research, all the stories I'd collected, I'd never found a single instance of anyone successfully fighting back against the entities. Those who encountered them either escaped or disappeared. There was no middle ground, no victory. But I agreed to help her. What choice did I have? As it turned out, I never got the chance. The next morning, Thornton was gone, transferred effective immediately to a park on the other side of the country. The official reason was a family emergency, but I knew better. Someone higher up had decided she was a liability, a risk to the carefully maintained silence surrounding the truth of our park. Martinez found me staring at the memo announcing Thornton's replacement, a career bureaucrat from Washington who had never worked a day in the field. "They got to her," Martinez said quietly, "just like they get to anyone who starts asking too many questions." "Who is they?" I demanded. "Who's covering this up?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe no one. Maybe everyone. Maybe it's just the system protecting itself from a truth it can't accommodate." She sighed heavily. "This is why I've kept my head down all these years, Parker. You can't fight this. Not and keep your job anyway." 2 weeks later, Martinez was gone to retired suddenly after 15 years of service. She left without saying goodbye, without clearing out her locker, just vanished overnight. I tried calling her, visiting her home in town. Neighbors said she'd packed up and left, no forwarding address. It was as if she'd never existed. That's when I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever forces were at work, the entities in the forest, the people covering up their existence, or some unholy alliance between the two, they were closing in around me. I was the last one left who knew the truth, who had documented it. I was a loose end. I submitted my resignation the next day, 2 years earlier than this story began. 2 years of looking over my shoulder, moving from town to town, trying to make sense of what I'd seen and experienced. 2 years of nightmares and paranoia, and the constant gnawing fear that they might have followed me out of the forest. And now, finally, I'm telling my story. Not the full truth. There are parts I still can't bring myself to write down, horrors that would sound too outlandish to believe. But enough, I hope, to warn others, to make people think twice before venturing off-trail in national parks. To understand that some places in this world don't welcome human presence, and some things in the darkness are better left undisturbed. It's been 2 years since I left the Park Service. 2 years of trying to build a normal life, of waking in the night drenched in sweat, certain that the buzzing has started again. 2 years of scanning every forest edge, every shadow, for movements that don't belong. I live in a small apartment in a big city now, as far from wilderness as I can get. I work a desk job, something mindless and safe that doesn't require me to think about what might be lurking just beyond human perception. I don't hike anymore, don't camp, can barely bring myself to walk through city parks on sunny days. But the memories remain, sharp and vivid, and sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn when the city sleeps and the world narrows to the confines of my small room, I wonder if I truly escaped. 3 months after I left, I received a package. No return address, no note inside, just a USB drive containing hundreds of files, reports, testimonies, photographs, a comprehensive record of unexplained incidents across the national park system going back decades. There was only one person who could have sent it, Thornton. Whether as atonement or warning, I'll never know. The files confirmed what I had suspected. Our park wasn't unique. The phenomena occurred throughout the system, though with varying frequency and intensity. Some parks were relative hotspots, with dozens of incidents each year. Others might go decades between unexplained events. But the pattern was undeniable, as was the consistency of the descriptions. The tall black figures, the faceless white entities, the spider things, and others, many others, each more terrifying than the last. More disturbing were the personnel files rangers who had reported unusual experiences, only to be transferred, forced into early retirement, or subjected to psychiatric evaluation. The system had a way of eliminating those who saw too much or asked too many questions. I found Martinez's file among them. After her retirement, she had been admitted to a private facility specializing in delusional disorders. She died there 3 months later. Suicide, according to the death certificate. I know better. I've spent these 2 years compiling everything I know, everything I've learned since leaving. I'm not the only one. There are others out there, former rangers, hikers who encountered something they couldn't explain, families of the missing who don't accept the official explanations. We find each other online, in anonymous forums and private message boards. We share our stories, our theories, our nightmares. Some believe the entities are interdimensional beings, slipping through weak points in the fabric of reality. Others think they're manifestations of the land itself, primordial forces given form and intent. A few suggest they might be something humans once worshipped as gods or demons, ancient powers that retreated from civilization but never truly left. I don't know what they are. I'm not sure it matters. What matters is that they're real, they're dangerous, and the people who should be protecting the public from them are instead protecting them from public knowledge. A week ago, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Just 2 sentences. They know you're sharing information. Be careful. The account was deleted immediately after sending. I've been looking over my shoulder even more since then, jumping at shadows, startling at every unexpected sound. Last night, I woke to the sound of static on my television, though I was certain I'd turned it off before going to bed. As I reached for the remote, the static cleared for just a moment, revealing a familiar semicircular clearing with the dead tree at its center. Then back to static, and the TV shut itself off. A warning, a threat, a lingering effect of trauma and paranoia. I don't know anymore. What I do know is that I can't stop now. People need to be warned, even if they don't believe, even if it puts me at risk. So I'm publishing my story, my experiences, everything I can safely share without sounding completely unhinged. Maybe it will reach someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it will save lives. If you're reading this, please take it seriously. If you're planning a trip to a national park, stay on marked trails. Don't hike alone. Be back before dark. If the forest goes silent around you, if you feel a buzzing in your skull, if you sense eyes watching you from between the trees, turn back immediately. Don't run, don't panic. Just walk steadily to the nearest trail or road or populated area. And if you see something that shouldn't exist, something that moves wrong or feels wrong or simply doesn't belong in this world as we understand it, don't approach, don't investigate, don't try to capture it on film. Just leave. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some knowledge comes at too high a price. I've done what I can, shared what I know. The rest is up to you. As for me, I'm leaving the city tomorrow, moving somewhere new, somewhere no one knows me. I'll keep monitoring the forums, keep collecting stories and evidence, but more discreetly now. There are too many eyes watching, too many forces that want this information suppressed. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if they'll ever let me rest, if I'll spend the rest of my life running, hiding, looking over my shoulder. If the buzzing will one day start again, and I'll turn to find them standing in my living room, or my bedroom, or my office. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if I ever truly left that forest at all. If perhaps the real Samantha Parker is still there, trapped in some in-between place, while something else walks around wearing her face, living her life, slowly forgetting that it was ever anything but human. But that's just the paranoia talking, isn't it? Listen to me. Be careful out there. The wilderness is ancient and vast and holds secrets we're not meant to understand. Most of you will never encounter what I did. Most of you will hike and camp and explore without incident, returning home with nothing but pleasant memories and photographs. But some of you won't. Some of you will stray off the path, venture too deep, stay too late. Some of you will hear the buzzing, feel the silence, sense the watchers in the trees, and some of you will never come back at all. I've said my piece, shared my truth, fulfilled my obligation to warn those who will listen. What you do with this information is up to you. But remember, if you're ever in the wilderness and the forest falls suddenly, unnaturally silent, don't run, don't speak, don't look back. Just walk away as calmly as you can and pray that it lets you. Greetings. I work in the forest industry as a ranger. I'm from Idaho, specifically the Idaho side of the Grand Tetons. This is going to sound completely insane, but I swear every word of what follows actually happened. I'm not high on acid or any other substance for that matter. I've never touched drugs in my life. Let me take you back to where it all began. In 1997, I was assigned to Grand Teton National Park shortly after graduating from college with a degree in biology. My name is James Thorne, though most people call me Jim. Being a young person in a new area and finally working for a living, I was beyond ecstatic to get my feet wet in the field of Forest Service. I'd dreamed of this career since I was a boy, hiking with my father through the dense forests of northern Michigan where I grew up. That first autumn working in the Tetons arrived quickly. The aspen leaves were turning a brilliant gold, the air was growing crisp, and the tourists were beginning to thin out. My supervisor, Carl Blackwood, had just started taking me out on patrols, familiarizing me with the hiking trails, camping sites, and the areas where wildlife roamed freely. The most important thing about this job isn't the wildlife or the land, Carl told me one day as we hiked through a particularly dense section of forest. It's the people. Your job is to protect them from the wilderness, and sometimes protect the wilderness from them. I nodded eagerly, soaking in every bit of wisdom from this grizzled 30-year veteran of the Park Service. Carl was in his mid-50s, with weathered skin and eyes that seemed to catch every movement in the forest. Nothing escaped his notice. "There are things in these woods, Jim," he continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "things you won't read about in your textbooks." Before I could ask what he meant, our radio crackled to life. There was a report of unusual footprints found near Cascade Canyon, about 3 miles from our location. Carl's expression changed, subtly a tightening around his eyes that I couldn't quite interpret. "Looks like you're up, rookie," he said, handing me the coordinates. I need to head back to headquarters for a meeting, take photos, notes, measurements, standard procedure. I felt a surge of pride at being trusted with my first solo assignment. What do you think made the tracks? I asked. Carl's gaze drifted to the dense tree line. Probably just some hiker with oversized boots playing a prank. Happens every season. But there was something in his tone that didn't match his words. My coworkers were occupied with deep cleaning and maintaining equipment for the autumn season, so I headed out alone. The trek to Cascade Canyon took about 40 minutes. The reported footprints were located just off a less-traveled trail, in a muddy patch near a small creek. What I saw there changed everything I thought I knew about the natural world. The tracks were enormous, easily 15 inches long and 7 inches wide. The indentation in the mud was deep, suggesting whatever made them weighed hundreds of pounds. If you've ever seen those old 90s TV shows where they showed guys displaying plaster casts of Bigfoot footprints, I always thought those were fake, manufactured for ratings. But standing there, looking at these impressions with my own eyes, I knew there was truth to those casts. I knelt beside one print, careful not to disturb it. The shape was unmistakably foot-like, with 5 distinct toe impressions, but this was no human foot, nor any bear or known wildlife. The stride between prints was massive and nearly 5 feet apart. Whatever left these tracks had to be incredibly tall. As I took measurements and photos, a sensation crept over me, that unmistakable feeling of being watched. The forest had gone quiet. No birdsong, no squirrels chattering, nothing but the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. I scanned the tree line, searching for movement, for eyes, nothing. But the sensation remained, prickling the hairs on the back of my neck. Something was out there, observing me. I tried to focus on my task, but my hands had begun to tremble slightly. I wasn't just experiencing the normal awareness of being in predator country. This was different, more targeted, more intelligent. I felt like prey being sized up. The prints continued along the creek for about 30 yards before disappearing into the dense underbrush. I followed them to their end, documenting each one. When I reached the point where they vanished, I found something else, a tuft of dark hair caught on a thorny bush. It wasn't bear fur, which I was familiar with. This was longer, coarser, almost human-like, but not quite. I carefully collected the sample in an evidence bag, my mind racing with possibilities. What kind of creature was I tracking? And more importantly, was it still nearby, watching me? I radioed back to headquarters. "Blackwood, you there? It's Thorne." After a moment of static, Carl's voice came through. "Go ahead, Jim. These prints, they're not a prank. They're real, and they're unlike anything I've seen before." There was a long pause. When Carl finally responded, his voice was tight. "Finish your documentation and head back. I'll meet you at the ranger station." By the time I returned, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the park grounds. Carl was waiting for me in his office, door closed, unusual for him. He was typically an open-door kind of supervisor. I laid out my photos, measurements, and the hair sample on his desk. "What do you think? Could it be a new species? Something undocumented?" Carl studied the evidence, his expression unreadable. Then he opened a cabinet behind his desk, removed a small kit, and began making a plaster cast mixture. "We'll preserve one of the prints," he said, avoiding my question. "Standard procedure." "But what made them?" I pressed. "These aren't from any animal I studied in school." Carl's eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw something in them, not fear exactly, but caution. "Some things in these woods don't make it into the textbooks, Jim. Some things are better left undocumented." "You mean like Bigfoot?" I said with a nervous laugh, testing the waters. Carl didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. "I mean that there are aspects of this job that we don't discuss. Not with the public, not with friends or family, sometimes not even among ourselves. But if there's an undiscovered species out there, drop it, Jim." He cut me off, his tone brooking no argument. "File your report. Stick to the facts, measurements, location, photos. No speculation, no theories, just the facts." That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my cabinetary branch cracking, every rustle in the underbrush had me sitting upright, straining to hear. The image of those massive footprints kept flashing in my mind, along with the sensation of being watched. What was out there in the darkness? And why was Carl so adamant about keeping it quiet? I didn't know it then. But that day marked the beginning of a journey that would consume the next 8 years of my life, a journey into the heart of a mystery that the Forest Service seemed determined to keep buried in the shadows of the Grand Tetons. By the summer of 1998, I had settled into my role as a ranger at Grand Teton National Park. The memories of those massive footprints from the previous autumn had faded somewhat, pushed aside by the daily responsibilities of the job, but they never completely disappeared. On quiet nights, I'd still find myself thinking about them, wondering. Carl Blackwood had been true to his word. The incident was documented, filed away, and never mentioned again. I'd tried to bring it up once during a routine patrol, and the look he gave me was enough to silence any further questions. It was clear some things weren't meant to be discussed. June brought a surge of visitors to the park, and with them came the usual problems: littering, wildlife harassment, occasional lost hikers. I was assigned to patrol the less-traveled eastern trails, where the dense forest pressed close against the mountains. It was beautiful, solitary work, and I had grown to love the quiet communion with nature. One morning in late June, I set out at dawn to check a series of backcountry campsites. The air was still cool, heavy with the scent of pine and wildflowers. I'd been hiking for about 2 hours when I decided to take a short break near a thicket of blackberry brambles. The berries weren't quite ripe yet, but in another month, they'd be perfect. I sat on a fallen log, drinking water and making notes in my journal about trail conditions. That's when I felt it again, that primal, unmistakable sensation of being watched. The forest had gone silent, just as it had that day with the footprints. No birds, no insects, nothing but the soft whisper of wind through the pines. My hand instinctively moved to the bear spray on my belt. Slowly, I raised my head and scanned the area. Nothing seemed out of place. Then, almost imperceptibly, the blackberry brambles about 30 yards away moved against the wind. I focused on that spot, barely breathing, and then I saw a face peering at me through the tangle of vines and leaves. But it wasn't the face of any animal I recognized. It reminded me of that character from the 1980s TV show Elf. It had a short snout, but the resemblance ended there. This creature's face was much more primitive, with deep-set black eyes that seemed to bore into me with frightening intelligence. Its skin was a mottled dark color, covered in patchy hair. The face was too large to be a raccoon or any other forest animal I knew, and the eyes were what haunted me most. There was something unsettlingly self-aware in them. For perhaps 10 seconds we stared at each other, neither moving. My heart pounded so hard I was sure it must be audible. Then, with a slight rustling of leaves, the face disappeared back into the brambles. I sat frozen for what felt like an eternity, unsure if I should approach or retreat. Professional curiosity eventually won out. Cautiously, with bear spray in hand, I made my way to the blackberry thicket. There was nothing there. No creature, no tracks in the soft earth. Nothing but a few broken vines and a tuft of dark hair caught on a thorn similar to what I'd found with the footprints. And that smell. A musky, almost human odor that wasn't entirely unpleasant, but definitely wasn't any animal scent I recognized. I collected the hair sample and searched the area for prints or other signs, but the ground was too dry and covered with pine needles to show tracks. Whatever had been watching me had vanished without a trace, save for that small tuft of hair. Back at headquarters, I debated whether to report what I'd seen. The memory of Carl's warning was still fresh, but this was different. This was an actual sighting, not just tracks. Surely that warranted documentation. I decided to confide in Ryan Kepler, another ranger who'd started a few months before me. We were about the same age, and I thought if anyone would listen without judgment, it would be him. I caught him alone in the equipment room, inspecting radios. "Hey Ryan, got a minute? I saw something strange out on the eastern trails today." He glanced up, then went back to his work. "What kind of strange?" I lowered my voice. I think I saw a Sasquatch, or something like it, watching me through some blackberry brambles." Ryan's hands went still. Slowly, he put down the radio he was holding and turned to face me, his expression deadly serious. "We're not supposed to talk about those things," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then he walked away, leaving me standing there, confused and increasingly uneasy. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face watching me from the brambles. I began researching online, poring over Bigfoot documentaries and reports. desperate for information that might explain what I'd seen. Most of what I found was clearly hoaxes or misidentifications, but some accounts, especially those from Forest Service employees, park rangers, and hunters, had a ring of authenticity that resonated with my experience. Many described the same feeling of being watched, the same unnatural silence in the forest, the same intelligent eyes. Over the next year, I became hyper-aware of my surroundings while on patrol. I'd catch glimpses of movement just at the edge of my vision, shadows that seemed to melt into the trees, strange sounds at night, wood knocks, and occasional high-pitched whistles that didn't match any known wildlife. I started carrying a small camera with me, hoping to capture evidence, but whatever was out there seemed to know when I was watching and remained frustratingly elusive. In early 1999, there was an incident that confirmed I wasn't imagining things. A family camping near String Lake reported that something had circled their campsite all night, making odd vocalizations and throwing pine cones at their tent. They described the sounds as like someone trying to talk underwater, guttural and bubbling, but with distinct patterns that suggested language rather than animal noises. I was assigned to investigate the next morning. The campsite was in disarray, food containers scattered, a cooler dragged nearly 50 yards into the woods. But what chilled me were the footprints identical to those I documented nearly 2 years earlier. As I was photographing them, Carl appeared. He surveyed the scene in silence, then turned to me. "File the report as bear activity," he said quietly. "But these aren't bear tracks," I protested. "They're the same as the ones from Cascade Canyon. You know they are." Carl's expression hardened. "Bears, Jim. That's the official report. Understood." I wanted to argue, but something in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't anger, it was fear. Carl Blackwood, who'd faced down aggressive grizzlies and survived 3 avalanches in his career, was afraid. "Why?" I asked simply. He glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. "Because some answers come with consequences none of us are prepared to face. Trust me on this, please." I nodded reluctantly and filed the report as instructed, bear activity. But that night, as I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the forest, I made a decision. I would find out what was out there, what had Carl so afraid, with or without the Forest Service's blessing. The watchers in the woods had sparked something in me, a burning need to know, to understand, and I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led me. What I didn't realize then was how deep the mystery went, or how dangerous my pursuit would become. The millennium came and went without the computer apocalypse everyone had feared, but my own personal world was increasingly filled with unexplainable encounters. By the spring of 2000, I had been promoted to senior ranger, which gave me more autonomy and, crucially, access to incident reports dating back decades. I spent my off hours combing through these files, looking for patterns. What I found was disturbing not for what was documented, but for what was clearly missing. Reports would begin with detailed descriptions of large, unexplained footprints or strange vocalizations, only to conclude with mundane explanations like bear activity or hoax perpetrated by campers. The disconnect was jarring and obviously deliberate. More concerning were the geographical patterns. Certain areas of the park had significantly higher concentrations of these incidence areas that were subsequently closed for ecological restoration or wildlife protection. One such area was Avalanche Canyon, a remote, difficult-to-access region that had been officially closed to the public since 1982 for endangered species habitat protection. No endangered species was ever named in the documentation. In May of 2000, I was assigned to patrol the perimeter of Avalanche Canyon to ensure no hikers had bypassed the warning signs. It was early morning, the sun just beginning to crest the mountains, when I saw them. There were 3 of them, standing at the edge of a small clearing about 60 yards away. They were massive, the smallest at least 7 feet tall, the largest easily approaching 8. Unlike the elf-like creature I'd glimpsed through the brambles, these beings had flat faces more akin to great apes, with pronounced brow ridges, flat noses, and large, sagging lips. Their bodies were covered in dark hair, ranging from chocolate brown to almost black. They hadn't noticed me yet. I was downwind, partially concealed by a stand of lodgepole pines. My hands trembled as I slowly reached for my camera, careful not to make any sudden movements. The creatures appeared to be foraging, methodically turning over rocks and fallen logs, occasionally stooping to examine something on the ground. Their movements were deliberate, almost human-like in their precision. One of them, the largest, reached up to a branch about 9 feet off the ground and effortlessly pulled it down to examine some kind of growth on it, possibly fungi. I managed to snap 3 photos before disaster struck. My radio crackled to life with the morning check-in call, the sound echoing in the quiet forest. All 3 heads snapped in my direction simultaneously, with a coordination that sent chills down my spine. For a moment we all froze. Then the largest one made a sharp, barking sound, and as one, they melted into the forest with a speed and silence that defied their massive size. I stood there, heart racing, camera clutched in my shaking hand. I had proof, now undeniable proof. But even as that thought formed, I knew what would happen to those photos. They would disappear, just like all the other evidence collected over the years. Sure enough, when I returned to headquarters, Carl was waiting for me. Somehow, he knew. "The camera, Jim," he said, holding out his hand. There was no anger in his voice, just resignation. "They're real, Carl," I said, not relinquishing the camera. I saw 3 of them. They were intelligent, coordinated. They were communicating with each other. "I know," he said quietly, surprising me. "The camera, please." "Why? Why are we hiding this? The public has a right to know what's out there." Carl sighed heavily. "Do they? Do they really? Think about what would happen if these photos got out. Think about the hordes of thrill-seekers, hunters, scientists, media that would descend on these mountains. What would happen to those creatures then?" I hadn't considered that aspect. "They'd be hunted," I admitted reluctantly. "Best case scenario, they'd be studied like lab rats. Worst case, they'd be exterminated out of fear or for trophies. Is that what you want?" I handed over the camera, understanding for the first time that the secrecy might be protective rather than conspiratorial. "There are forces at work here beyond the Forest Service, Jim," Carl added, pocketing the camera. "People higher up who are very invested in keeping this quiet, for everyone's safe, including yours." The warning was clear, and I nodded my understanding. But privately, I had already decided to continue my investigation, just more discreetly. Over the next year, reports from visitors increased dramatically. A hiker claimed to have seen red eyes watching her from across some bushes, followed by a ground-shaking scream that sent her running back to the trailhead. She never returned to the park. A group of climbers reported finding their campsite ransacked at 10, 0 feet far higher than bears typically ventured. Their food was gone, but their expensive climbing gear was neatly stacked and untouched. Then, in the autumn of 2001, I had my third and most profound encounter. I was conducting a wildlife survey in a remote northern section of the park, cataloging elk movements before winter set in. I had climbed to a ridge that offered a good vantage point, and was glassing the valley below with binoculars when I noticed movement in a stand of aspens about half a mile away. Focusing my binoculars, I nearly dropped them in shock. What I saw wasn't an elk or a bear. It was bipedal, moving with purpose through the trees. But unlike the other creatures I'd encountered, this one was different. It looked almost human, or more accurately, like a reconstruction of Neanderthal man I'd seen in a museum. The face was distinctly humanoid, with a heavy brow ridge but a higher forehead than the ape-like creatures I'd seen before. Its nose was broad but proportional, its jaw strong but not protruding. The body was heavily muscled and covered in reddish-brown hair, but the hair seemed less dense, particularly on the face. It moved with a fluid grace that belied its bulk, navigating the terrain with the confidence of one who knows every rock and tree. As I watched, it stopped at a small stream, knelt, and to my astonishment used its cupped hands to drink, just as a human would. Then it did something that froze the blood in my veins. It stood, turned directly toward my position on the ridge, and stared. There was no way it could see me clearly at that distance. I was nearly half a mile away and partially concealed by rocks. Yet somehow, it knew exactly where I was. It raised one massive hand and, in a gesture that seemed impossible, deliberately waved. Not a threatening gesture, not a warning, a wave, as one intelligent being acknowledging another. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving me shaken to my core. That night I broke protocol. I didn't report the sighting. I didn't tell Carl or any of my colleagues. This encounter felt personal, almost sacred. The creature had acknowledged me, recognized me as another thinking being. It had chosen to reveal itself to me. I began to wonder if these encounters weren't random at all. What if I was being deliberately shown different types of these beings? What if they were studying me as much as I was studying them? The thought both terrified and fascinated me. What were they? Not just physically, but intellectually, socially. Were they a relict population of some prehistoric human cousin? A separate evolutionary branch entirely? Something else we had no category for? More importantly, what did they want? Why reveal themselves to me specifically? I had no answers, only questions that multiplied with each encounter. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear: these beings were far more diverse, intelligent, and complex than the simple Bigfoot of popular culture. And they seemed to be trying to tell me something. I just had to figure out what it was before someone decided I knew too much. By 2002, my obsession with the forest secrets had begun to affect my personal life. I'd broken off a promising relationship with a woman from Jackson because I couldn't share what consumed my thoughts, and friends had stopped inviting me to gatherings after one too many declined invitations. My small cabin at the edge of the park had become a research center of sorts, walls covered with maps marking sighting locations, shelves overflowing with books on cryptozoology, anthropology, and evolutionary biology. I was becoming the stereotype of the obsessed loner, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew it wasn't healthy. But I couldn't stop, not after what I'd seen. That spring brought an unusual number of visitors to the park, driven by a mild winter and early thaw. With them came an uptick in strange reports: food going missing from secured containers, unusual sounds at night, and the persistent feeling of being watched that so many described in the same terms. In April, I received a call about a particularly disturbing incident. A family of 4 had been camping near Lee Lake when something had approached their site in the middle of the night. The father, Mark Stevens, was a former Marine and not prone to exaggeration. His report deserved serious attention. I drove out to their campsite, where they were packing up to leave despite having reserved the spot for 3 more days. "We're not staying another night," Mark said firmly as I approached. His wife was hurriedly stuffing a sleeping bag into its compression sack while their 2 children, a boy of about 10 and a girl maybe 7, sat quietly in the back of their SUV. "Can you tell me what happened?" I asked, notebook ready. Mark glanced at his wife, then lowered his voice. "It started around 2 a.m., something circling the campsite, heavy footsteps, breaking branches. I thought it was a bear at first, so I got my bear spray ready and told everyone to stay in the tent." "Did you see anything?" I prompted when he paused. "Not at first. Just heard it moving around. Then it started making these sounds." "What kind of sounds?" Mark looked uncomfortable. "Like nothing I've ever heard. Sort of a chattering. Like 2 people arguing in some foreign language, but with this weird quality to it. My wife said it reminded her of Vietnamese. She worked with some Vietnamese folks back in Oregon. Said it had that kind of rapid-fire tonal quality, but wrong somehow. Like someone trying to imitate the language without knowing it." I nodded, trying not to show my excitement. This matched other reports I'd collected. "Then what happened?" "It went on for maybe 20 minutes, this chattering. Then silence. I thought maybe it had left. I was about to try to get back to sleep when something hit the tent, not hard, more like a tap. Then another. I realized something was throwing small pebbles at us." "Pebbles?" This was new. "Yeah, just little ones, like it was trying to get our attention. That's when Caitlin, me daughter, started crying, and whatever it was let out this sound. Like a howl, but not a wolf howl. Deeper. It seemed to go on forever, like it was echoing inside my chest." Mark shuddered at the memory. That's when I decided to take a look. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out, and he trailed off, looking at his family, then back to me. "You're going to think I'm crazy." "I won't," I assured him. "We get all kinds of reports. Nothing surprises me anymore." That seemed to reassure him. There were 2 of them, standing just at the edge of our campsite. They were not bears, not anything I've ever seen. "Can you describe them?" "Tall, 7, maybe 8 feet, covered in dark hair, but standing on 2 legs with arms that hung down past their knees. Their faces." He shook his head. "Their faces were almost human, but not quite. Flatter. But their eyes, I could see their eyes catch the moonlight. They were watching us, watching me." "What did you do?" "Nothing. I was frozen. Then one of them took a step toward the tent and I just reacted. I yelled as loud as I could, trying to scare it off like you would a bear. It stopped, and for a second I thought it worked. Then it made this sound almost like laughter, but distorted, and they both just turned and walked away. Didn't run. Walked. Like they weren't afraid of me at all. Mark ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken by the recollection. When we got up in the morning, all our food was gone. Every bit of it, even though we had it in bare canisters. The canisters were still locked, but somehow empty, and there were footprints all around the campsite. Huge footprints. "Can I see them?" He led me around the campsite. Sure enough, there were clear tracks in the soft earth, the same distinctive prints I'd become all too familiar with. I took photographs and measurements, though I knew they'd likely disappear into the same black hole as all the other evidence. As I was finishing up, Mark's daughter approached, clutching a small stuffed rabbit. "The forest people took Mr. Whiskers," she said softly. I knelt to her level. "The forest people?" She nodded solemnly. "They took him last night, but they brought him back this morning. He was sitting outside the tent, but they made him smell funny." I glanced at Mark, who nodded confirmation. Her toy was missing after the incident. "We found it this morning, placed right in front of the tent flap. It smells musky." "Can I?" I held out my hand, and the little girl reluctantly handed over her stuffed rabbit. The toy did indeed have a distinctive odor, that same musky, almost human smell I'd encountered before. More importantly, there were several long, dark hairs caught in the rabbit's fuzzy material. I carefully removed a few and placed them in an evidence bag, my heart racing. This could be the physical proof I'd been seeking. "What are they?" Mark asked as I sealed the bag. I chose my words carefully. "We're not entirely sure. Some sort of undocumented wildlife. Please don't worry, they've never harmed anyone that we know of. They seem more curious than dangerous." Mark wasn't buying it. "Those weren't animals, Ranger Thorne. Those were something else, something that thinks." I couldn't argue with him. He'd seen what I'd seen. "I'll file a complete report," I assured him, knowing full well what would happen to it. "We'll increase patrols in this area." As the family drove away, I stood in the empty campsite, evidence bag in hand, wondering what to do. Protocol dictated I turn everything over to Carl, but I knew what would happen if I did. This was too valuable. I made a decision then that would change everything. I pocketed the hair samples and took them to a friend who worked at the university in Jackson, a geneticist, who owed me a favor and, more importantly, knew how to be discreet. I told him they were from an unknown animal, and I needed a DNA analysis done off the books. 2 weeks later he called me, his voice tight with excitement or fear, I couldn't tell which. "These samples," he said without preamble, "where did they really come from?" "I told you, an unidentified." "Cut the crap, Jim. This isn't from any known animal. The DNA sequence, it's closest to human but with significant divergences. It's like finding a branch of hominids that split off from our evolutionary tree hundreds of thousands of years ago and continued developing in isolation. This is impossible." My hand tightened on the phone. "But not if they've been living in remote wilderness areas, avoiding human contact. Do you understand what you've stumbled onto? This would rewrite evolutionary history. This is the scientific discovery of the century. And that's exactly why no one can know about it," I said firmly. "At least not yet. I need more evidence, more samples, and I need your word that this stays between us." There was a long pause. "Fine. But when you're ready to go public, I want to be part of it." I agreed, though privately I wondered if going public would ever be an option. That summer brought more encounters, more reports. It seemed as if the creatures I'd begun thinking of them as the people of the forest, after the little girl's comment, were becoming bolder, more willing to reveal themselves. Then came the incident that nearly cost me my life. It was late August, and I was conducting a routine patrol in a remote section of the park. The day had been uneventful, and as dusk approached, I decided to make camp rather than hike back in the dark. I found a small clearing, set up my tent, and prepared a simple meal on my camping stove. As darkness fell, the forest grew unusually quiet. No night birds called, no insects chirped. That familiar sensation of being watched crept over me, but after years of experiences, I'd almost grown accustomed to it. "I know you're out there," I said aloud, surprising myself. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm not here to harm you." No response came, but the feeling of being observed intensified. I finished my meal and was preparing for sleep when I heard a series of wood knocks, 3 in rapid succession, then 2 more after a pause. They came from the north side of my campsite. Almost immediately, answering knocks came from the east, then the west, then the south. I was surrounded. My heart began to race as I realized what was happening. They had coordinated to encircle my position, using the knocks to communicate their locations to each other. This wasn't random, this was strategy. I reached for my radio, but before I could call for help, something large and heavy landed beside my tent, a rock the size of a bowling ball, thrown with enough force to embed itself partly in the soft earth. A warning shot. I froze, radio in hand, suddenly understanding that I was completely at their mercy. If they wanted to harm me, they could have crushed my tent and me with that rock. Instead, they had deliberately missed. They were sending a message. From the darkness came that chattering sound, rapid and complex, moving around the perimeter of my camp. They were communicating with each other, discussing me, perhaps deciding my fate. Then a new sound emerged, a low, rumbling vocalization that seemed to come from a massive chest. It rose and fell in what sounded almost like speech, though no words I could recognize. It was coming from directly in front of my tent. Slowly, heart in my throat, I unzipped the tent flap and looked out. Standing not 20 feet away, illuminated dimly by my camp lantern, was the largest of the forest people I had yet encountered. It had to be at least 9 feet tall, broad-shouldered and powerful, with a coat of silver-tipped dark hair. Its face was the most human-like I'd seen, intelligent eyes set deep under a heavy brow, a nose that was flat but distinctly nostrils, a mouth that was wide but with lips, not a muzzle. It regarded me with an expression I couldn't read, but which didn't seem threatening. Rather, it appeared evaluative, judging. Slowly, deliberately, it raised a massive hand and pointed directly at me, then gestured to the forest around us, then back to itself. The meaning seemed clear. You, here, us. I found my voice somehow. I mean no harm, I said, the words sounding inadequate even to my own ears. I'm trying to understand. The creature tilted its head slightly, as if considering my words. Then it made a sweeping gesture with its arm, indicating the mountains, the forest, everything around us, before placing its hand flat against its chest. Mine, the gesture said. Our home. I nodded slowly. Yes, your home, I understand. The creature held my gaze for a moment longer, then turned and melted into the darkness with that same impossible silence. One by one, the presences I felt around my camp withdrew, until I was alone again with only the normal sounds of the night forest resuming around me. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I had just experienced what I believed was first contact, a deliberate, intelligent interaction with a non-human sentient species. They had shown themselves to me purposefully, communicated with me, warned me. But what exactly were they warning me about? To stay away? Or was it something else, warning about others who might threaten their existence? I didn't know. But as dawn broke over the mountains, I made a vow. These beings, whatever they were, deserved protection. And I would do everything in my power to ensure they received it, even if it meant going against the very agency I worked for. What I didn't realize was that forces were already in motion that would make keeping that vow nearly impossible and potentially deadly. The years between 2003 and 2005 brought a profound shift in my understanding of the forest people and the forces arrayed to keep them secret. What had begun as personal curiosity had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. Following that night in the forest when the large silver-tipped being had communicated with me, I began noticing subtle changes in how the park was managed. Certain areas always corresponding to locations with high numbers of sighting reports were suddenly closed for environmental studies or habitat restoration. Rangers I'd never seen before, with credentials from departments that seemed vague at best, began conducting surveys in these areas, always armed, always secretive. Carl Blackwood retired suddenly in early 2003, replaced by a stern, by-the-book administrator named Diana Myers, who made it clear from day one that any reports of unusual wildlife encounters were to be forwarded directly to her office, not filed in the general system. I kept my head down and continued my work, but privately, my research intensified. I created detailed maps of sighting locations, established patterns of movement that suggested migratory behaviors, and continued collecting physical evidence when possible: hair samples, footprint casts. even audio recordings of those distinctive chattering vocalizations. My geneticist friend at the university had continued analyzing the samples I provided, growing increasingly astonished by what he found. It's not just one type, he told me during a clandestine meeting in a coffee shop in Jackson. The DNA variations suggest at least 3 distinct populations, possibly subspecies, all related but with significant genetic divergence. They've been isolated from each other for a long time. This matched my own observations of the different types I'd encountered: the elf-like creature, the flat-faced ape-like beings, and the more Neanderthal-appearing individual. They weren't just physical variations within a species, they were distinct evolutionary branches. How is this possible? I asked. How could they have remained undiscovered for so long? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Think about it, Jim. North America has vast wilderness areas that remain largely unexplored. The Pacific Northwest alone has millions of acres of dense forest where humans rarely venture. The Tetons, Yellowstone, the Cascades, the Olympic Peninsula, all connected by wilderness corridors. A small population of intelligent beings who actively avoid human contact could remain hidden indefinitely. But someone knows, I insisted. The Forest Service, the government. Someone knows they exist and is covering it up. He nodded slowly. I've been doing some digging of my own. There are rumors in scientific circles about a program that began in the 1970s, Operation Primate. Officially, it was about studying great ape populations in captivity. Unofficially, there are whispers that it was about documenting and containing a native North American hominid population. My blood ran cold. Containing? Keeping them isolated, managing their territories to minimize human contact occasionally, removing individuals that strayed too close to population centers. The implications were horrifying. You're saying they've been killing them? I don't know for certain, but there are incident reports heavily redacted about specimen collection and threat neutralization. I thought about the armed researchers I'd seen in the park, the sudden closures of areas with high sighting activity. It made a terrible kind of sense. I need to expose this, I said firmly. The public needs to know. My friend grabbed my arm, his expression grave. Think carefully, Jim. If this is true, you're dealing with a decades-long government conspiracy. People who are willing to conceal the existence of an entire species won't hesitate to silence one park ranger. He was right, of course. But I couldn't simply do nothing. In the summer of 2004, I began documenting everything meticulous, creating backups of my research, recording video logs of my findings, sending encrypted files to secure servers. If anything happened to me, the truth wouldn't die with me. I also began reaching out cautiously to other rangers and park employees who had hinted at unusual experiences. Most were reluctant to talk, but a few shared their stories, always in hushed tones, always looking over their shoulders. A maintenance worker described finding massive nests made of broken branches high in the trees, far larger than any eagle or osprey would build. A trail guide spoke of leading a group through a remote area when stones began raining down on them from a ridge where no humans were visible. A night security guard at the visitor center swore he'd seen a huge, hair-covered figure peering through the windows after hours. Bit by bit, I pieced together a picture of a substantial population, perhaps hundreds of individuals across the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, with territory extending into Idaho and Wyoming. They lived in family groups, communicated with a complex language of vocalizations and gestures, used tools, and had sophisticated social structures. And they were under threat, not just from habitat loss but from active suppression of their existence. In early 2005, I had perhaps my most significant encounter yet. I was investigating reports of strange vocalizations near a remote alpine lake when I found clear evidence of the forest people, a freshly abandoned campsite of sorts, with a crude shelter made of branches, a fire pit with still warm ashes, and most remarkably, arrangements of stones and sticks that appeared deliberately placed in patterns. As I documented the site, I heard movement in the trees behind me. Turning slowly, I found myself face to face with one of the Neanderthal-type beings, standing not 30 feet away. It was male, powerfully built, with graying hair suggesting advanced age. Most striking were its eyes, deep, intelligent, and filled with what I could only interpret as sadness. It made no move to approach or flee, simply watching me as I slowly raised my hands to show I was unarmed. After a moment, it pointed to the stone arrangements, then to itself, then made a series of flowing gestures with its hands. I realized it was trying to tell me something about the patterns. Looking more closely, I saw that they weren't random. They formed shapes that resembled mountains, lakes, rivers. It was a map of the region, created with stones. The being approached cautiously, keeping a respectful distance, and used a long stick to touch specific points on the stone map. At each point, it made a distinct vocalization, different names for different places, I realized. It was sharing knowledge with me, teaching me. For nearly an hour, we engaged in this strange form of communication, the being showing me locations on its map, making sounds that I tried my best to repeat, occasionally making gestures that seemed to represent animals or weather patterns. It was the most profound cross-species communication I had ever experienced. Then, without warning, the being's head snapped up, its nostrils flaring. It let out a low, rumbling sound that needed no translation warning. Danger, and vanished into the forest with that same impossible silence. Moments later, I heard the distant whump-whump of helicopter rotors. Grabbing my camera and notebook, I quickly photographed the stone map and retreated to a concealed position. The helicopter, unmarked, matte black, circled the area twice before landing in a small clearing about a quarter-mile from the stone map site. 3 men in unmarked tactical gear emerged, carrying what looked like tranquilizer rifles and tracking equipment. They moved with military precision, clearly searching for something or someone. I remained hidden, heart pounding, as they swept the area, paying particular attention to the abandoned campsite and stone map. One of them took samples from the fire pit, while another made a call on a satellite phone. I couldn't hear what was said, but their body language suggested frustration. They had missed their quarry. After about 20 minutes, they returned to the helicopter and departed. I waited another hour before emerging from my hiding place, shaken by what I'd witnessed. This was no ordinary research team. This was a capture operation. The incident confirmed my worst fears. Not only were the forest people real, but there was an active, organized effort to track and capture them. And now I had witnessed it firsthand. When I returned to headquarters that evening, Director Myers was waiting for me. "Ranger Thorne," she said, her voice cold. "I understand you were in Sector 7 today. That area is restricted due to unstable terrain. Care to explain?" I kept my expression neutral. "I was investigating reports of unusual sounds, probably just elk, but we've had several hikers mention it, so I thought I should check." She studied me for a long moment. "Did you observe anything out of the ordinary?" "Just wildlife, elk tracks, some marmot burrows, nothing unusual." "No other visitors? No aircraft?" She knew. Somehow she knew I'd seen the helicopter. "No, ma'am. It was quiet. Why do you ask?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just confirming our airspace wasn't violated by tour operators again. They've been a problem lately." She paused. "Jim, you've been with us for what, 8 years now?" "Almost, yes. You're a valuable member of the team, but I've heard concerns that you might be overly interested in certain aspects of the park's wildlife, pursuing theories that might be better left unexplored." The threat was barely veiled. "I'm just doing my job, Director. Monitoring wildlife is part of that." "Of course. Just remember that the chain of command exists for a reason. Any unusual observations should come directly to me, not to outside parties, not to the public. Understood?" I nodded, my mouth dry. Understood. That night I made my decision. I couldn't continue like this, looking over my shoulder, pretending I didn't know what I knew. The forest people deserved protection, recognition, scientific study, not to be hunted and captured like animals. I began organizing my evidence: DNA analysis, footprint casts, hair samples, photographs, audio recordings, video logs, witness statements. I created multiple copies, storing them in various secure locations. I drafted a comprehensive report documenting everything I'd learned over 8 years of observation and research, and I prepared to blow the whistle on what might be the most significant scientific cover-up in human history. The night before I planned to send my findings to select journalists and scientists, I received a text message from an unknown number. "They know. Burn everything. Run." Minutes later, my cabin's power went out. Through the window, I saw multiple vehicles approaching along the access road, their headlights off. I had only moments. Grabbing my go bag prepared months ago for just this scenario and a hard drive containing a copy of my research, I slipped out the back door and into the forest that had become my second home over the past 8 years. As I melted into the darkness, using every wilderness skill I'd learned, I heard car doors slamming, voices calling orders, the beam of flashlights cutting through the trees behind me. They had come for me, just as my friend had warned they might. I moved deeper into the wilderness, towards the areas where I knew the forest people frequented. If anyone could help me disappear, it was them. They had been doing it successfully for thousands of years. As I crested a ridge, I paused to look back. My cabin was now illuminated by floodlights, figures in tactical gear moving methodically through it and the surrounding area. Further down the valley, I could see the lights of the park, of civilization, a world I wasn't sure I could return to. Then, from the darkness beside me came a soft, chattering sound familiar, almost comforting now. I turned to find one of the forest people standing there, its outline barely visible in the moonlight. It gestured for me to follow, then turned and moved silently into the trees. Without hesitation, I followed. Where I was going, what would happen next, I had no idea. But one thing was certain: the truth about the shadows in the Tetons would not remain hidden forever. Whether through my efforts or someone else's, the world would eventually know about the people of the forest. And perhaps, when that day came, we would all be better for it. I don't like driving at night. There's something about the endless stretch of darkness, broken only by the cold sweep of headlights, that puts me on edge. But that night, I didn't have a choice. It was 2:13 a.m. when I finally pulled out of Mark's driveway. We'd been college roommates years ago, and these occasional catch-up sessions had become our way of maintaining the friendship. Mark lived in Oak Ridge, a small town about an hour from where I lived in Riverdale. The drive between our towns wasn't complicated, mostly Highway 16, a long, straight stretch of asphalt cutting through dense forest and open countryside. "You sure you don't want to crash here?" Mark had asked as I grabbed my keys. "It's late, man." I had shaken my head. "Got that meeting tomorrow. Need my notes at home." I didn't mention that I also hated sleeping on his lumpy couch, or that my insomnia was always worse in unfamiliar places. "Text me when you get home," he'd said with a wave. The first 10 minutes on the road were fine. I had the radio on, windows cracked to let in the cool October air. My headlights cut through the fog that had started to settle in the low-lying areas. The coffee I'd downed before leaving was doing its job, keeping me alert despite the late hour. But 20 minutes in, fatigue began to set in. The monotony of the road, the same endless yellow lines disappearing under my car, the same wall of trees on either side made my eyelids heavy. I turned the radio up, switched from music to talk radio, hoping the voices would keep me engaged. I cracked the window wider, letting the cold air slap my face. There wasn't another car in sight. Not surprising for this stretch of Highway 16 at this hour. During the day, it was a decent thoroughfare, connecting several small towns to the interstate. But at night, especially a Wednesday night in October, traffic was practically non-existent. I checked my Phonino service, another charming feature of this stretch of road. For about 40 minutes of the drive, you were completely cut off. No calls, no texts, no emergency services. Just you and the road and whatever else might be out there in the dark. I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping unease. I'd made this drive dozens of times, nothing to worry about except staying awake. I slapped my cheek lightly, then harder, took another sip of now cold coffee from the travel mug in my cup holder, focused on the road ahead. That's when my headlights caught something in the distance. At first, it was just a shape, a darker patch against the night. As I drew closer, confusion set in. Something was blocking the road, something big. I eased my foot off the accelerator, squinting to make out what I was seeing. The shape solidified, became recognizable. A semi-truck, parked sideways across both lanes. "What the hell?" I muttered, slowing to a crawl as I approached. The truck's headlights were off, but I could see a faint glow from the cabin. The massive vehicle was positioned perfectly to block the entire width of the highway, the cab facing the forest on one side, the trailer angled toward the steep embankment on the other. I came to a stop about 20 feet from the truck's cab. For a long moment, I just sat there, engine idling, trying to process what I was seeing. This stretch of Highway 16 was at least 30 minutes from the nearest town in either direction. There was nothing out here, no gas stations, no rest stops, not even a farm access road. just forest and the occasional clearing. My first thought was an accident. Maybe the driver had fallen asleep, swerved, and ended up jackknifed across the road. But there was no damage that I could see, no skid marks visible in my headlights. My second thought was more unsettling, a roadblock. I'd read about tactics used by carjackers or worse, blocking a road, forcing a victim to stop, but that seemed far-fetched out here. The highway was too deserted to make it a worthwhile strategy. You might wait days before someone came along. I considered my options. The right side of the road, past the trailer, had a narrow shoulder before dropping off into a steep drainage ditch. In daylight, with a four-wheel drive, I might have risked it. But in my sedan at night, with fog settling in, too dangerous. The left side was no better. The trees grew close to the road there, with barely enough space to walk between them, let alone drive my car through. I could turn around, head back to Mark's, but that would mean another hour on the road when I was already exhausted, plus explaining to him why I'd returned. And what if this was a genuine emergency? What if the driver was hurt? I turned off the radio, rolled up my window. The silence that followed was absolute. No distant traffic noise, no hum of civilization. Just the soft purr of my engine and the occasional creak of cooling metal. I pulled out my phone again, still no service. With a sigh, I put it back in my pocket, turned off my car, and grabbed the small flashlight I kept in the glove compartment. "Hello?" I called as I stepped out of the car. My voice sounded small in the vast darkness. "Anyone there? Need help?" Nothing. Not even an echo. I switched on my flashlight, its beam weak against the encompassing night. The air was colder than I'd expected, and damp with fog. I zipped up my jacket and began walking toward the truck. As I approached, I noted details I hadn't been able to see from my car. The truck was older, its once white paint now a dirty gray, no company logo that I could see. The trailer was the standard box type, its rear doors facing the forest side of the road. I reached the cab and paused, listening. The faint hum of the truck's systems was audible now that I was close, but nothing else. No radio, no voices, no movement. I aimed my flashlight at the ground near the driver's side door and noticed something that made me pause. Droplets of some dark liquid. I crouched down for a closer look. In the yellow beam of my flashlight, the droplets appeared black, but I knew what it was. Blood. A cold sensation spread through my chest. I straightened up quickly, suddenly very aware of how isolated I was. I considered returning to my car, driving back to Mark's, forgetting the whole thing. But what if someone was hurt? What if they needed help right now, and I was their only chance? Taking a deep breath, I stepped up to the driver's door and knocked. "Hello, driver? Are you okay in there?" The window was too high for me to see inside from where I stood. After waiting several seconds with no response, I knocked harder. "Hey, anyone in there? Do you need help?" Still nothing, not even a rustle of movement. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, but I couldn't shake the responsibility I felt. If I left and someone died because I was too scared to check properly, I'd never forgive myself. I grabbed the handrail and pulled myself up onto the step, bringing my face level with the window. What I saw inside made me freeze. The cabin light was on, illuminating a scene of chaos. The small living space behind the seats was torn apart, clothes strewn everywhere, storage compartments open and emptied, the small mattress at the back askew. The driver's seat was empty, but stained with the same dark substance I'd seen on the ground. Most disturbing of all, the passenger door was wide open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. I dropped back down to the ground, heart pounding. This wasn't an accident or a mechanical issue. Something violent had happened here. I backed away from the truck, eyes darting between the open door on the far side and the surrounding darkness. That's when I heard a subtle shifting sound, like footsteps on fallen leaves, coming from the forest edge beyond the truck. I swung my flashlight in that direction, but its beam barely penetrated the first line of trees. The fog had thickened, creating a ghostly barrier between the road and the forest. "Is someone there?" My voice cracked slightly. "I can call for help." Another sound closer now, deliberate footsteps moving up the embankment from the forest toward the road. I took another step back, fumbling for my phone even though I knew it was useless out here. Then he emerged from the fog. He came up slowly from the tree line, a tall figure materializing from the mist like something out of a nightmare. In the weak beam of my flashlight, I could make out shoulder-length hair, dark and matted, framing a face that remained in shadow. His clothes, what looked like a flannel shirt and jeans, were stained with dark patches that my mind immediately connected to the blood in the truck. I backed up another step, my free hand still clutching my useless phone. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you okay? What happened here?" The man didn't respond. He continued his slow approach, moving with an odd, stiff gait that seemed both deliberate and unnatural. As he drew closer, stepping into the faint periphery of light from my car's headlights, I could see more details. His clothes weren't just stained but torn in places, and his hands, hanging at his sides, were covered in the same dark substance. "Look, I can help," I said, taking another step back. "If you're hurt, I can drive you to a hospital." The words sounded hollow even to my own ears. The nearest hospital was at least 45 minutes away, and everything about this man screamed danger, not injury. Still, he said nothing, just kept walking, his path angling toward the truck's cab. "If you don't want help, that's fine," I continued, now halfway back to my car. "But I should call the authorities. Someone might be hurt." That stopped him. He froze mid-step, his head snapping toward me with an unnerving suddenness. For the first time, I got a clear look at his face. It was caked with dirt and what could only be dried blood, creating a grotesque mask that distorted his features. But what struck me most were his eyes, pale and alert, utterly at odds with his disheveled appearance. They fixed on me with an intensity that sent ice through my veins. "I'm fine," he said finally. His voice was deep, roughened, like gravel under tires, but the threat in it was unmistakable, a warning, not a reassurance. For a long moment we stood there in silent confrontation, separated by about 30 feet of asphalt. My mind raced through options, none of them good. I couldn't outrun him if he decided to come after me. My car was close, but not close enough that I could guarantee reaching it before he reached me. Then his gaze shifted slightly, looking past me toward my car, and I saw something new in his expression: calculation. That's when I realized I'd made a critical mistake. I'd left my keys in the ignition. The man's eyes returned to mine, and the corners of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. He knew what I'd just realized. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I turned and ran for my car, adrenaline drowning out the fear that had paralyzed me moments before. Behind me, I heard his footsteps quicken, but I didn't look back. 3 seconds, 4 or 5, and I was at my car door, yanking it open, throwing myself inside. I slammed the door shut just as the man reached the hood, his bloodied hands leaving smears on the metal as he tried to block my escape. I threw the car into reverse, my foot slamming down on the accelerator. The tires spun, caught, and the car lurched backward. The man lunged to the side, narrowly avoiding being hit, but his expression never changed, no fear, no surprise, just that same calculating intensity. I spun the steering wheel, executing a clumsy 3-point turn, tires screeching on the asphalt. Through my windshield, I watched as the man straightened up and calmly walked toward the truck. I should have floored it then, raced back to Mark's, called the police the moment I had cell service. That would have been the smart thing to do. Instead, I hesitated, watching in my rearview mirror as the man climbed into the truck's cab with practiced ease. The interior light illuminated him briefly, the blood-stained clothes, the matted hair, the strange calm with which he settled into the driver's seat. He wasn't the truck's driver, I was certain of that now. The original driver was somewhere else, maybe in the forest, maybe in the trailer, maybe in pieces in both places. The truck's engine roared to life, headlights suddenly blazing, momentarily blinding me through my rearview mirror. I hit the gas, tires squealing as I accelerated away from the scene. In my mirror, I saw the truck begin to move, straightening out to follow the highway following me. Fear hit me like a physical blow. The highway ahead was empty and dark, my car was low on gas, and there would be no other traffic, no witnesses, no help for miles. I pushed my sedan as fast as I dared on the foggy road, taking curves faster than was safe, constantly checking my mirror. The truck's headlights stayed with me, sometimes falling back on the curves where the semi's bulk worked against it, then gaining on the straightaways where its powerful engine gave it the advantage. 10 minutes of this terrible chase passed before I saw the road marker I'd been praying for, the turnoff to Old Mill Road, a narrow but paved back route that connected eventually to the interstate. It would add 20 minutes to my journey back to Mark's, but the road was too narrow for a semi to navigate safely, especially at night. I didn't signal, didn't want to give the truck driver any warning. At the last possible moment, I wrenched the wheel right, felt my tires bump over the shoulder, and then I was on Old Mill Road, its narrower pavement and tighter curves immediately forcing me to slow down. In my mirror, I saw the truck's headlights continue straight, unable to make the sharp turn. A surge of relief washed through me, quickly tempered by the realization that the driver now knew where I was headed. If he was familiar with the area, he might guess I was circling back to Oak Ridge. Old Mill Road was even darker than the highway, the trees crowding close on both sides, creating a tunnel of shadow that my headlights barely penetrated. Every curve brought the momentary fear that something or someone would be blocking the road ahead. 23 agonizing minutes later, I saw the welcoming glow of Oak Ridge's lights. The town was small, just a few thousand people, but right then it seemed like the safest place in the world. I pulled into the 24-hour gas station on the edge of town, parked under the bright fluorescent lights, and checked my phone. Service had returned. With shaking hands, I dialed Mark's number. "Dude, where are you?" he answered, sounding sleepy but concerned. "It's been over an hour." "Something happened," I said, my voice unsteady. "On Highway 16. A truck. A man." I struggled to put the experience into words that wouldn't sound like the ramblings of an exhausted, paranoid mind. "Are you okay? Where are you now?" "Gas station on the edge of town. Can you come get me? And we need to call the police." "Stay there," Mark said, fully alert now. "I'm on my way. 5 minutes." I ended the call and sat watching the road I'd just come from, half expecting to see the semi appear. But the night remained still, the empty road offering no clues about what had just happened or what might happen next. Mark arrived in 4 minutes, his old pickup skidding slightly as he pulled into the gas station lot. He jumped out, concern etched on his face, and rushed to my car. "Jesus, what happened?" he asked as I got out. Then his eyes widened as he looked at my car. "Is that blood?" I followed his gaze to the hood where dark smears marked where the man had touched it. "Yes," I said quietly. "We need to call the police, now." Mark pulled out his phone, but I stopped him. "Let's go to your place first." I don't want to be out in the open." He looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded. "Follow me." Back at Mark's house, sitting at his kitchen table with a strong drink in hand, I told him everything. The truck blocking the road, the ransacked cabin, the bloodstains, the man emerging from the forest, the chase. "And you think this guy, what, hijacked the truck, killed the driver?" Mark asked, his expression somewhere between skeptical and horrified. "I don't know what happened," I admitted, "but something bad, something violent. And I'm pretty sure he would have done the same to me if I hadn't gotten away." Mark nodded slowly. "Okay, let's call the cops." The Oak Ridge Police Department was small, just 10 officers serving the whole town, but they responded quickly. Within 20 minutes, 2 officers were sitting in Mark's living room, notebooks out, faces serious as I recounted my story for the second time. "And you say this was about 30 minutes east of town on Highway 16? Officer Brennan, the older of the 2, asked. I nodded. "There's nothing out there. No side roads, no houses, just where the highway cuts through Miller's Woods." Brennan exchanged a look with his partner, Officer Davis. "That's county jurisdiction," he said. "We'll need to contact the sheriff's department." "But you'll check it out, right?" I pressed. "There could be someone hurt out there, or worse." "We'll coordinate with the sheriff," Brennan assured me. "They'll send a patrol car to investigate. In the meantime, we'd like to take a look at your vehicle, maybe get some photos of those stains you mentioned." I led them outside to where my car was parked next to Mark's pickup. The blood smears were clearly visible even in the dim porch light. "We'll need to take samples," Davis said, returning to their cruiser for a kit. "What about the truck?" I asked Brennan. "It had to go somewhere. It's a semi, for God's sake. Someone must have seen it." "We'll put out an alert," he said, "but without a license plate or company name." "It was white," I said, "or had been white once. Older model. The trailer was a standard box type. No markings I could see." Brennan made notes but didn't look optimistic. "That describes about half the independent truckers on the road, but we'll do what we can." After taking photos and samples from my car, the officers prepared to leave. "We'll be in touch once the sheriff's department has checked out the scene," Brennan said. "In the meantime, try to get some rest. You've had quite a shock." Rest was the last thing on my mind. After the police left, Mark offered to let me stay the night, and this time I accepted gratefully, but sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man emerging from the fog, his blood-stained hands, his calculating eyes as he realized I'd left my keys in the ignition. Around dawn, my phone rang. It was Officer Brennan. "Mr. Taylor? We've received a report from the sheriff's department. They sent a car to the location you described, but there was nothing there. No truck, no signs of a disturbance, nothing unusual at all." I sat up, fully awake now. That's impossible. There was blood on the ground in the cabin, and the man, he couldn't have cleaned all that up. "The rain probably washed away any evidence that might have been on the road," Brennan said. "It started coming down pretty hard, around 4 a.m. "What about the sheriff's deputies? Did they check the forest?" "The man came up from there. There might be something down there." I couldn't bring myself to say, "a body." They did a cursory check of the immediate area with flashlights, but found nothing suspicious. They'll do a more thorough search once it's fully light. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a creeping sense of doubt. Had I imagined the whole thing? No blood on my car was real. The police had taken samples. That at least was tangible proof. Mark was already up, making coffee in the kitchen. "Any news?" he asked as I wandered in. I told him about the call. "They didn't find anything. But that's impossible. The truck was blocking the entire road. The cabin was covered in blood." Mark handed me a mug of coffee. "I believe you," he said. "But you know how these things go, without evidence." "The blood on my car is evidence," I insisted. "And once they test it, they'll know it's human blood. They'll have to take this seriously then." But even as I said it, I knew how it sounded. A tired driver on a dark, foggy road, imagination running wild, a truck that disappeared without a trace. Blood that could be any animal, paint, my own paranoid fantasy. "I need to go back there," I said suddenly. Mark nearly choked on his coffee. "Are you insane? After what happened?" "It's daylight now," I reasoned. "And if the sheriff's deputies didn't find anything, it means the area is clear. I need to see for myself. Maybe there's something they missed." "Like what? A signed confession from this mystery man?" "Like anything that proves I'm not losing my mind," I snapped, then immediately regretted it. "Sorry, I know what I saw, Mark. I know what happened." Mark sighed. "Fine, but I'm coming with you, and we're taking my truck better visibility higher off the ground, and we're bringing my hunting rifle." I started to protest the last part, then thought better of it. "Okay, let's go." The drive back to the spot where I'd encountered the truck felt surreal. In daylight, with Mark beside me and his rifle secured in its rack behind our seats, Highway 16 looked completely different, just an ordinary stretch of rural highway cutting through pleasant countryside. The rain had stopped, but the road was still wet, puddles gathered in the low spots. The fog had cleared, revealing vistas of farmland interspersed with patches of forest. Under different circumstances, it might have been scenic. "It should be right up here," I said as we approached the area where Miller's Woods crowded close to the highway on both sides, about a quarter-mile past that curve. Mark slowed the truck, both of us scanning the road and shoulders for any sign of what had happened the night before. We reached the spot I'd indicated and pulled over. "This is it," I said, climbing out of the pickup. The truck was parked right across here. I walked to the center of the road, turning slowly to take in the scene. In daylight, I could see that the road here was slightly wider than I'd remembered, with a broader shoulder on the right side before the drainage ditch. On the left, the trees weren't quite as close to the road as they'd seemed in the dark. There was maybe 10 feet of grassy verge before the forest began. "You're sure this is the spot?" Mark asked, coming to stand beside me. "Positive," I said, though doubt was beginning to creep in. Everything looked so ordinary. No skid marks on the pavement, no disturbed ground on the shoulder, no broken branches where the truck might have brushed against the trees. I walked to where I remembered the truck's cab had been positioned and crouched down, examining the asphalt. If there had been blood droplets here, the rain had indeed washed them away. The pavement was clean, still damp from the rainfall. "Let's check the woods," I suggested, straightening up. "That's where he came from." Mark looked uncomfortable but nodded, returning to his truck to retrieve the rifle. "Just in case," he said, catching my look. We crossed to the left side of the road and stood at the forest's edge. In daylight, it was just a typical mixed hardwood forest, nothing particularly ominous about it. A gentle slope led down from the road, covered in fallen leaves and undergrowth. He came up from down there, I said, pointing. Let's go. Mark slung the rifle over his shoulder, and we began picking our way down the slope. The ground was slippery from the rain, fallen leaves masking potential hazards. We moved carefully, eyes scanning the forest floor for anything unusual. About 50 feet from the road, the slope leveled out into a small clearing. A stream ran through it, swollen from the rain, its banks muddy and disturbed. Wait, I said, grabbing Mark's arm. Look at that. Near the stream bank was an area where the ground had been significantly disturbed, leaves and undergrowth pushed aside. The earth churned up as if by a struggle or heavy activity. We approached cautiously. The disturbed area was roughly circular, about 8 feet in diameter. At its center, the ground was particularly muddied, with what looked like deep impressions, possibly footprints, though the rain had rendered them indistinct. Something definitely happened here, Mark murmured, crouching down for a closer look. I scanned the surrounding area and noticed something caught in a bramble at the edge of the clearing, a scrap of dark fabric. I carefully extracted it. It was a piece of flannel, torn and stained with what could have been mud or blood. Mark, I called, holding up the fabric. Look at this. He came over to examine it. Could be nothing, he said. Hunters come through these woods all the time. In the exact spot where I saw a man with a flannel shirt covered in blood, that's one hell of a coincidence. Mark didn't argue. Instead, he pulled out his phone. We should call the sheriff's department, let them know what we found. But before he could dial, his phone slipped from his hand, landing in a puddle. He cursed, quickly retrieving it and wiping it on his jacket. Damn it, screen's gone black, must have shorted out. I pulled out my own phone, but as expected, there was no service. We'll have to go back to the road, I said. Maybe get signal there. As we turned to leave, something caught my eye, a glint of metal half buried in the mud near the stream. I moved closer, brushing away wet leaves to reveal a set of keys attached to a rectangular plastic fob. I picked them up, wiping away the mud. The fob had a company logo, Interstate Freight Services, and what looked like an employee ID number. Truck keys, I said, showing them to Mark. This is where it happened. This is proof. Mark examined the keys, his skepticism visibly wavering. Okay, he said finally. Let's get back to the road, call this in. We made our way back up the slope to the highway. Just as we reached the road, a sheriff's department cruiser pulled up behind Mark's truck, lights flashing but no siren. 2 deputies got out, hands resting casually near their holsters as they approached us. I recognized the wariness in their posture. They saw 2 men emerging from the woods, one carrying a rifle. Everything all right here? The older deputy called. Mark carefully unslung the rifle, holding it pointed at the ground. Yes, sir, he said. We were just checking something in the woods. My friend here had an incident on this road last night. Recognition dawned on the deputy's face. You're Taylor? The one who reported the truck blocking the road? Yes, I said, stepping forward. We found something down there, evidence. I held up the keys and the scrap of fabric. And there's a clearing where the ground has been disturbed, like there was a struggle. The deputy's expression remained neutral. We searched this area at dawn, sir. Didn't find anything unusual. You must have missed it, I insisted. It's about 50 feet down near a stream, and I doubt you were looking for something this small. I held up the keys again. The deputies exchanged a look. All right, the older one said. Show us. We led them down to the clearing. In the 20 minutes since we'd left it, the scene was unchanged, the disturbed earth, the muddy center, the stream running high and fast. The younger deputy crouched by the disturbed area, examining it closely. Could be animal activity, he said. Lot of deer in these woods. They bed down, leave marks like this. Deer don't carry truck keys, I said, handing over the Interstate Freight Services fob. Or wear flannel shirts. I showed him the fabric scrap. The older deputy took the keys, turning them over in his hand. Where exactly did you find these? I pointed to the spot near the stream. Right there, half buried in the mud. He nodded slowly. We'll take these into evidence, and we'll get a forensics team out here to examine this area properly. What about the truck? I asked. Have you found it? Not yet, he admitted. We've put out an alert to all departments in the state. If it's still on the road, someone will spot it. And if it's not on the road? Mark asked. The deputy didn't answer directly. We're doing everything we can, sir. Now I'd appreciate if you two would head back to town. This is an active investigation, and we need to secure the scene." There wasn't much we could do but comply. As we climbed back into Mark's truck, I felt a mix of vindication and frustration. They had proof now that something had happened. The keys alone were evidence of that. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to find, more to understand about what had occurred in those woods. "They'll handle it from here," Mark said as we pulled back onto the highway. "That's their job." I nodded, but kept my eyes on the forest as we drove away, wondering what secrets it still held and whether anyone would ever uncover them all. 3 weeks passed. The initial investigation had yielded some results, but far fewer than I'd hoped for. The keys I'd found were confirmed to belong to an interstate freight services truck assigned to a driver named Alan Meeks. Meeks had been reported missing 2 days after my encounter, when he failed to make a scheduled delivery and couldn't be reached. The truck itself was found abandoned at a rest stop near the state line, wiped clean of prints and with no trace of blood or other evidence. As for the flannel scrap, lab tests showed traces of human blood, but not enough for a DNA match to any known person. The disturbed area in the clearing was thoroughly examined, but the combination of rainfall and time had destroyed any conclusive evidence. The official report listed it as consistent with both human activity and natural causes. I gave multiple statements, first to local police, then to county detectives, and finally to state investigators when they took over the case. Each time, I told the same story. Each time I could see the same skepticism in their eyes. They believed something had happened. The missing driver and abandoned truck confirmed that much, but my account of the blood-covered man and the chase seemed too dramatic, too much like something from a horror movie rather than real life. "Trauma can affect memory," one detective had suggested gently. "The mind fills in gaps, makes connections that may not be there." I knew what I'd seen, but with each passing day, with each retelling of the story, I found myself questioning small details. Had the man's hair been shoulder length, or just unkempt? Had his voice been threatening, or was that my interpretation of a neutral statement? Had there really been blood all over the truck's cabin, or just a few stains that my frightened mind had amplified? Mark had been supportive throughout, never questioning my account, always ready to defend me when others expressed doubt. But even he seemed relieved when the investigation began to wind down, when my involvement became peripheral rather than central. "You need to try to move on," he said one evening, a month after the incident. We were sitting on his porch, watching the sunset. "They're still looking for Meeks, still trying to piece together what happened. But you've done all you can." "I know," I admitted. "It's just, there's no closure, no explanation for what I saw, for what happened out there." "Sometimes there isn't," Mark said. "Sometimes things just happen and we never get the whole story." He was right, of course. But that didn't make it any easier to accept. I'd taken to scanning news reports obsessively, looking for any mention of similar incidents: trucks found abandoned, drivers missing, strange men encountered on isolated roads. There were a few cases that seemed to share elements with mine, but nothing that connected definitively. The nightmares were the worst part. Almost every night I found myself back on that foggy highway, watching the man emerge from the woods. Sometimes in the dreams I didn't make it to my car in time. Sometimes I did, but the truck caught up to me on the highway. Sometimes I was the one walking up from the forest, blood on my hands, not knowing why or how it had gotten there. I started seeing a therapist, more at the insistence of friends and family than from personal conviction. Dr. Levine was patient and non-judgmental, never suggesting I had imagined or exaggerated what happened, but helping me process the fear and uncertainty the experience had left me with. "It's normal to be haunted by unresolved trauma," she explained during one session. "Your mind keeps returning to it, trying to make sense of it, trying to find an ending to the story." "But there is no ending," I said. "At least not one I'll ever know." "Then perhaps you need to create one for yourself," she suggested. "Not a fictional one, but an acceptance that some things remain unknown. That uncertainty is part of life." It was good advice, but difficult to follow. The human mind craves resolution, explanation, understanding. To accept that I would never know exactly what happened that night, who the man was, what he had done, why he had been there, felt like surrendering something essential. 6 months after the incident, the case of the missing truck driver Alan Meeks was officially classified as a suspected homicide, though no body had been found. The primary suspect was described as an unidentified male, approximately 6'2", with shoulder-length dark hair, based largely on my testimony. But without further evidence, the case remained open but inactive. I tried to resume my normal life. I went to work, saw friends, even started dating again. But I never drove Highway 16 at night anymore, always finding alternate routes or reasons to stay over if I visited Mark. And I never, ever stopped for disabled vehicles on isolated roads. A year to the day after the incident, I received a call from Detective Harmon, who had led the state investigation. "We've got something," he said without preamble. "A truck driver was attacked at a rest stop in Nevada. He survived, gave a description of his attacker that matches the man you saw." My heart raced. "Did they catch him?" "No," Harmon admitted. "But the driver got a partial plate on the vehicle the attacker was driving. It was a pickup, not a semi, but it's the first solid lead we've had." "What does this mean for the Meeks case?" "It means we keep looking," Harmon said. "It means your story just got a lot more credible." After we hung up, I sat for a long time, turning this new information over in my mind. It wasn't closure, far from it, but it was validation. Someone else had seen the man I'd seen, had survived an encounter similar to mine. I wasn't alone in this anymore, and somehow, that made the uncertainty a little easier to bear. That night, I drove out to the spot on Highway 16 where it had all happened. It was daytime, the road busy with normal traffic, nothing like the isolated, foggy night of my encounter. I pulled over at the exact location and got out of my car. The forest looked ordinary, benign even, in the late afternoon sunlight. Birds sang, leaves rustled in the breeze. There was no sign that anything sinister had ever happened here. I walked to the edge of the woods and looked down the slope toward where the clearing and stream would be. I didn't go down, didn't need to. I just stood there, acknowledging what had happened, accepting that I might never know the full story. As I turned to go back to my car, a semi-truck passed on the highway, its white trailer gleaming in the sun. Just an ordinary truck on an ordinary day, the driver visible through the windshield, a middle-aged woman with short blonde hair, nothing like the blood-stained man I'd encountered. Yet watching it pass sent a chill through me. There are monsters on the road. Not supernatural creatures, but human predators who use the vastness of our highway system, the isolation of certain stretches, to find their victims. I'd escaped. Alan Meeks apparently hadn't. The truck driver in Nevada had, like me, lived to tell the tale. How many others had encountered the man with the shoulder-length hair and blood-stained hands? How many had survived? How many cases remained unsolved, unexplained, filed away as mysteries that would never be resolved? I got back in my car and pulled onto the highway, joining the flow of traffic heading toward town. In my rearview mirror, the stretch of road where I'd encountered the blocked semi receded, becoming just another piece of Highway 16. The mystery remained, the questions unanswered. But I was still here, still moving forward, and sometimes that has to be enough.